Chapter 51, Holy Grail 8, Course Credit. Chapter text Blue Fire, my 19th birthday, which was Halloween to everyone else, fell on a Monday nowhere near a full moon, but I talked Septima Vector into putting in for a 3-day weekend so I could substitute for her arithmancy class that day. Consequently, I got to spend my birthday with my girlfriend and see the drawing for the Triwizard Champions. The teaching itself was much more sedate than defense classes, since the class was all math nerds and was one of the smallest electives. Mondays were classes for the 3rd and 4th years, so I got to hang out with Hermione, Draco, and Luna, and a few of their more intellectual year mates. Maybe later in the year I could sub for Rune's class on a day that also had the same years, so I could check up on my Enchanting Club focus users. Most of them hadn't opted for arithmancy, but all of them got their arms twisted into taking runes. Sadly, teaching arithmancy rather than defense meant that Mathilda and I couldn't use the room of requirement for our lunchtime reunion, and had to settle for a much more chaste picnic in the courtyard. That evening, I cleared sitting with my friends with Dumbledore, rather than the staff table, and piled into a great hall that was more full of people than I'd ever seen it. In addition to the usual elaborate Halloween feast decorations, a massive and ancient-looking goblet full of blue flames was sitting in front of the staff table, across from Dumbledore's seat. They'd crammed in enough extra tables for 24 extra students, wearing the colors of the French school, Beauxbatons, and the secretive Eastern European school, Durmstrang. A Hagrid-sized woman and a glowering man doing a good impression of Rasputin were seated at the staff table. "Oh, hey, I know her," I said as I took my seat, recognizing Fleur de Lacre sitting at the Ravenclaw tables with the other Beauxbaton students. "How?" several boys asked, clearly already having crushes on the Vila-blooded witch. I shrugged. Met her at the World Cup. I think she hit it off with Ron's oldest brother. I gave her a small wave, which she returned with a wave and smile, probably glad to see another familiar face. "She'll probably be Beauxbaton's champion," Mathilda observed as she sat down next to me. I was glad that she got to hang out with Fleur when the girl was hanging all over Bill Weasley, since that would cut down on any potential jealousy. I put my name in for Hogwarts, but so did basically everyone in Gryffindor. "Not everyone," George complained. "Stupid age line. We'll be 17 in April," Fred groused. "Cedric's in our year and he got to enter." I agreed. It is weird that they don't do this every year if there's such a narrow window of who's eligible. "But I'm rooting for Thilda to be champion. You'll do great." She shrugged. "Lot of competition. Cedric might get it. Everyone likes him, and he's good." She thought about it, then looked at the Slytherin table. Also Maeve entered. That was worrisome, and reminded me of more than one of our conversations, where Maeve had made a point of suggesting that she was at the school to represent Hogwarts. Could she have known this competition was coming 2 years in advance? The fairy princess did indeed seem to be sitting in rapt anticipation of what was to come. "Probably crumb for Durmstrang," Ron suggested, distracting me from trying to dissect the she conspiracy. I looked over from Maeve toward where the Durmstrang students were sitting at the Slytherin table, and sure enough, there was the Seeker who'd played in the World Cup. How is he still in school? He's a professional sports star. Hermione explained, unlike Hogwarts and Beauxbatons, Durmstrang lets students stay on part-time past their 7th year to begin masteries or pursue other advanced studies. Doesn't really seem fair that they have such older students. The food finally appeared, and we loaded up our golden feasting plates with the dinner. While we ate, Mathilda pointed out everyone that was there for the tournament. Madame Maxime is the tall lady, Beauxbaton's headmistress. Probably half-giant too, but doesn't want people to know. "She's taller than Hagrid," Hermione huffed. "Would she rather us think she had an accident with an engorgement charm?" Mathilda continued. "Creepy guy is Karkaroff, former Death Eater, did well for himself becoming headmaster of Durmstrang. He's the one that outed Crouch Jr., Neville remembered. Basically got out of Azkaban by naming other Death Eaters. Next guy is Ludo Bagman, head of games and sports at the Ministry. Played beta for the Wimborne Wasps and the English national team when he was younger. The aging man looked like every rom-com stereotype of the ex-quarterback, getting fat and old, having peaked in high school. I could easily see him on a used car lot. He was also on trial after the First War," Neville recalled again. "Gave information to Rookwood, but said he didn't know he was a Death Eater. He got off because he was popular. At least we put Rookwood safely back in prison, I noted. And of course, Mathilda finished, you already know Umbridge. The aggressively pink-robed witch was chatting happily with Bagman, clearly pleased with her position of importance at the festivity. I guessed she wasn't just on the international team for the World Cup, huh? I wrote to Lexi, Mathilda agreed. She's having to work overtime. Umbridge keeps insulting everyone, Fleur especially, calls her a half-breed. I said, might be interesting to see her set on fire by an angry Vila. I bet none of them have forgotten that she put them in the undesirables camp. The Gryffindors that weren't up on all that hot gossip pressed us for the details for the rest of the meal, so we took turns recounting the Death Eater attack at the World Cup. Ron and Hermione had already basically heard the whole thing, but it seemed to still be news to most of the table. Katie Bell opined, shame they didn't do this last year. Harry could have been our champion. Don't put that juju on me, I grinned at the youngest Gryffindor chaser. Eventually, the food cleared, and Dumbledore stood up. I estimate the goblet requires another minute to make its decision, he stated. Now that he'd pointed it out, I could feel the magic at the front of the room intensifying. It seemed like a school election or votes by their teachers would have been a better way to determine the champions, but Britain did love letting magical artifacts make such important decisions. Maybe the Sorting Hat and the Goblet of Fire got together for poker on the weekends. The headmaster continued, the goblet will reveal the names of the champions one at a time, and I shall call out who has been selected. When your name is called, please report to the anteroom at the top of the hall. He gestured to a little-used door near the staff table. You will receive your next instructions once all champions are called and assembled. Ever the showman, he waved his wand to put out all the main lights in the hall, leaving only a few candles and jack-o'-lanterns for mood lighting, so the blue fire of the goblet became the brightest light in the room. Next to the twins, Lee Jordan checked his watch as if Dumbledore's pronouncement of a minute had been exact rather than estimate, and said, any second. Just as everyone was about to start complaining about the wait, the flames of the goblet suddenly turned red and shot out a giant plume of flame. A gasp went around the hall, and a piece of parchment was spat out, fluttering down into Dumbledore's hand. As the flames turned blue again, Dumbledore read, the champion for Beauxbatons is Fleur de Lacre. Congrats, Fleur. Mathilda and I shouted to the French blonde as she stood and made for the anteroom. Oh, look, they're all disappointed, Hermione observed of the other Beauxbaton students. Two of the girls even began sobbing. Maybe Fleur had some popularity issues. Not as much as Umbridge, Mathilda pointed out. The undersecretary had a frog-like scowl on her face as the half-breed girl was selected as champion. After Fleur exited the room, it gradually quieted again and eventually let loose another plume of red flame. Dumbledore explained, the champion for Hogwarts is Maeve Malfoy. He read the name with the same consternation I was feeling. The entire Gryffindor table groaned with disappointment, as did the parts of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff that we'd kept from falling under her sway, and who, honestly, had probably wanted Cedric. But the Slytherin table went nuts that their Queen Bee Mean Girl had become the champion for all of Hogwarts. Trying to cover for my worry that this was all part of the rumored continuing winter court plot, I joked, do you think Durmstrang has any white court succubi? We could have all the flavors of supernatural allure represented. Mostly burly guys, Ron shook his head. I don't think any of them are vampires. Maeve left the room quickly, and the final plume of red fire released its parchment. I was still trying to work out what Maeve's participation might mean, and didn't know anyone from Durmstrang, so I was blindsided when Dumbledore called out, the champion for Durmstrang is Harry Dresden. As the hall turned toward me in shock, and thrilled grins spread across my housemates at getting a surprise Gryffindor champion after all, I just let my head fall to thunk against the table, groaning out, oh, come on. Course credit Mathilda finally shoved me to my feet and pushed me toward the anteroom for the champions. Most of the great hall was quiet in confusion, despite the soft cheers of the Gryffindor students, and I said loudly to the assemblage, they just had to have this on my birthday, huh? Something weird always happens on Halloween around here. That started the discussion as I left, and I hoped I'd got my point across that I hadn't planned to enter, much less under a different school. I pushed into the anteroom, which was small, basically wallpapered in portraits, and had a large, roaring fireplace. Fleur looked at me, from where she'd been crowding near the fireplace, staying as far as possible from Maeve, and asked, "Awry, is there a problem with the Durmstrang champion?" "Yeah, the problem is that it's me," I told her. I moved to the opposite side of the fireplace from Fleur, far enough from her that I could keep both her and Maeve in view at the same time. Maeve looked quietly smug, so I asked her, "This part of the plan you didn't agree with?" She just shrugged, but didn't deny it. Great. Any further interrogation of Maeve or discussion with Fleur was cut off by entirely too many staff and tournament organizers entering the room for its size. In addition to Madame Maxim, who could almost fill the room by herself, Bagman, Umbridge, Dumbledore, Karkaroff, McGonagall, and Remus all somehow squeezed in. Before anyone could start arguing, Dumbledore asked, "Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" "No," I told him, loud enough for everyone to hear, then elaborated, "And you can confirm that I haven't even been in the Great Hall since last week, until right before the feast. Plus, if I had, wouldn't I have been champion for Hogwarts?" I left unsaid that that might be a better option than the one we got, but I wasn't above shooting Maeve a look about it. "Perhaps I can explain that," Headmaster Karkaroff said, in remarkably clear English for all that he had some kind of Eastern European accent. All eyes turned to the man in the thick black robes and equally thick black hair and beard. "Mr. Dresden is a student of Durmstrang. I don't even know where to find Durmstrang. I've definitely never been there," I argued. "And yet," he shrugged, "you were enrolled by a parent or guardian and are on record as receiving private mastery instruction from one of our professors." He gave a pause, then shrugged. "Personally, I would have preferred Victor Crumb as our champion, but I understand that Harry Dresden is quite skilled and will bring honor to Durmstrang in this competition." I thought furiously, finally realizing, is the guardian that enrolled me also the one that is a professor at the school? Such is the nature of working parents now. He gave a grim chuckle. "Dumbledore got it, elaborating for the room, and perhaps your Professor Black Lestrange is in the castle and had the authority to submit her godson's name." McGonagall winced, not pleased by the reminder that her daughter's insane best friend was technically assigned as my godmother. Karkaroff allowed, "We had to bring sufficient tutors for our students who will be here for the year." Not missing a beat, Dumbledore opened the door to the antechamber, where a cloaked but obviously slight figure was waiting. "Come in, please, Bellatrix," he offered. As she pushed back her hood, there was no one in the room save perhaps the two French women that didn't recognize her. Umbridge began to sputter. "Bellatrix Black Lestrange. Here, auras." "Quiet dolors," my godmother hissed in a commanding tone, and that immediately shut the senior undersecretary up. Umbridge was a similar age, so I wouldn't put it past her to have been intimidated by my godmother when they were at school. "What are the auras going to do?" "Arrest you as a Death Eater at large," Dumbledore suggested, but he clearly didn't believe it. He could tell that if she would come into his domain, she wasn't worried about that outcome. He was probably just prompting her so she could get to the point as quickly as possible. We'd already mentioned to him how unworried she'd been to be arrested by Tonks a month or so earlier. Give my godmother credit. She was showing no signs of standing anywhere near Maeve, and in fact was causing several of the people in the room to move closer to the Slytherin as she moved to stand nearer to me and explained, "I believe you'll find that the signing of the Unseelie Accords provided a blanket pardon to the actions of agents of the Winter Court prior to the signing." Dumbledore frowned. That should have just been for actions during the short hostilities that led to said signing. Bellatrix sing-songed. "Someone didn't read closely. Umbridge caught up. You're an agent of the Winter Court and a professor at Durmstrang. Gotta wonder when she sleeps right." I interjected with an eye roll, feeling like I was starting to see the bigger picture finally. It was Bagman that eventually said, "So, Harry Dresden is the legal Durmstrang champion." I'd heard about him running the books at the World Cup and stiffing the Weasley twins on their winning bet, and could almost see his bookie's mind running the odds. "Unless anyone cares that I didn't personally enter and would prefer not to compete," I offered. I looked around, and other than Remus and my grandmother, everyone else seemed much more caught up in the politics of it. "Didn't think so. Sounds good. Par for the course. What are we doing next?" "Right, let's crack on then," Bagman suggested. Mind if I do the honors, Dolors? Umbridge would have probably objected, but still seemed afraid to speak lest my godmother remind her she'd told her to be quiet, so just nodded. Great. First task is about daring, and it's a secret until you get there. Courage in the face of the unknown and all of that. It's, November 24th. Big audience and a panel of judges. You can't ask for help or get any from your teachers. You go in armed only with your wands. I started to object, but about half the room also did as well, and Bagman immediately corrected. I mean wands or similar focusing objects, nothing fully enchanted. I hear you use a staff and such, but you'll have to lose the magic coat and whatever else. I nodded. That sucked, but seemed more fair to Fleur at least. You'll get information about the second task after the first. You're exempt from end-of-year exams, not that that would help me, and what am I forgetting? Weighing of the wands, Umbridge added, not willing to let her fear of Bellatrix Black Lestrange interfere with her punctiliousness. Morning of November 13th. Sure, not like I have a day job or anything, I said, not hiding my sarcasm. I also noticed the disgusted look that was growing on her face and asked, You're a judge, right, Madam Umbridge? Glad we've got someone that can be impartial. By which I meant that she was still mad at me about tanking her anti-werewolf legislation, thought Maeve was impossibly crass for a pureblood, and was clearly racist about Fleur's heritage. She might honestly like me best of the three of us. It was a weird feeling. I didn't like it. Dumbledore shot me a look, and then glanced at my godmother, and I picked up that he wanted me to talk to her and meet back up. Not that I'd probably be able to tell him much that I found out. But if she was willing to go public as my godmother, maybe part of the gesh on information would be weakened. I left the room with her, making it clear that she would have to at least work at disappearing without having a conversation. She hadn't put her hood back up, so I was able to wave to Mathilda and indicate who I was walking with. My girlfriend rolled her eyes, getting it, and gave me a look to ask whether I needed backup. I shook my head and nodded at Dumbledore's so she'd know to meet me at his office in a little while. The casual, easy communication you develop in a committed relationship is something you don't really notice until you're doing it, and it wasn't lost on me that I had almost the same rapport with Albus Dumbledore. I probably needed to spend less time with interfering old wizards. All right, what's going on? I asked my godmother, once we'd cleared the castle and found ourselves walking across the grounds toward the lake. I'd heard Durmstrang had shown up in a giant sailing ship that was a submarine by way of the Flying Dutchman, and were keeping rooms there. She clearly thought about being difficult, then simply admitted, we needed to allow at least one mortal champion to participate, or the old magics wouldn't work. But they only needed one, so why not stack the deck and take two of our own? Fleur's competent, but it seems unfair putting her up against me and Maeve, I argued. The goblet thought the arrangement was fair, she shrugged. We barely had to confound it to get our way. Britain really is too reliant on ancient artifacts whose magic they don't understand to make important decisions. Agreed, I said. I've been thinking the same thing earlier. What if I just put in a minimal effort? Then there are two other competitors with more of a drive for eternal glory, she said, sang with sarcasm. What if I actively try to keep Maeve from winning? I asked. Like you said, Miss Delacour is competent but not on your level. Maybe she won't even make it to the end, and then it's only down to you and Miss Malfoy. She paused, turning to look at me. Do you want me to insist you try to win, that there will be dire consequences if you don't? You just spend the next few months second-guessing whether it was reverse psychology. She reached up to pat me on the cheek. We've already stacked the deck and accounted for your previous behaviors. We can find out whether we predicted correctly without trying to press you further. Honestly, that would just make whatever you're going to do more unpredictable. I shrugged. She wasn't wrong. You know, Maeve tried to kill me. She said I was a liability to the plan. She groaned slightly, turning back to the ship, simply offering, you know the best thing about mortal teenagers? They eventually grow up. I don't say it enough, but I am often pleased by the man you're becoming. Good night, Harry, she said as she walked onto the creepy magical sailing ship. She paused at the top of the gangplank and suggested, come by if you need non-specific training. After all, I'm overseeing your mastery, and my doors are open while I'm in Britain. But I wouldn't want to train you on the specific challenges and risk accusations that you'd had an unfair advantage. Game plan as usual, Mathilda was a lot of help in prompting me to talk around the implicit limitations of my gesh to not reveal my godmother's secrets. If I'd actually willingly agreed to that deal, I'd probably have a way harder time flaunting it, or at least would feel some sort of punishment. In addition to Dumbledore and Mathilda, my grandmother and Remus had stuck around, and Moody had shown up to hear the bad news. At least it's only a few more days off this year. For the tournament, my boss grumbled. Albus, you should have done a lot more due diligence on that cup and guarded it better. The headmaster nodded, apologetically. I admit, after last year, I should have done more work to examine information that had since been filed away as fairy tales. You found something about what they may be up to? McGonagall asked. He nodded, gesturing to a stack of books he'd clearly been hastily flipping through since the choosing of the champions, and explained, there are many legends about fey strangers appearing to compete in tournaments. Even for stories about a simple prize, the implication is that, were it won by the stranger, its import would rise beyond simple riches. In the few stories about tournaments that are more of a grand political statement, a fairy victory is commensurately powerful. Simply, should they claim a victory, they will accomplish something greater than a trophy and 1,000 galleon prize. Eternal glory, I echoed what my godmother had said, and which I'd heard talked about as the real prize of the tournament. Who knows what that's worth to the she? Exactly, he nodded. This has gone from a friendly competition between schools to a challenge between magical realms. The outcome could be as if they had openly challenged Britain to a tournament in order to avoid a war. Europe, Moody spotted, not just Britain. Everyone paused as they contemplated that for a minute. With one win in the Triwizard tournament, they could probably claim a mystical reward equivalent to defeating all the wizarding armies of the European Union. Tell me someone's read the Accords. Mathilda insisted. Dumbledore agreed. It certainly seems a wise precaution, now that it seems simply getting it signed was not their endgame. He sighed. Doing so will consume much of the time I have available to research what other items Tom Riddle may have considered important. They span many volumes of law. My grandmother rolled her eyes and offered, then perhaps I could study these accords while you research Horcruxes. Ah, yes, Minerva. He honestly didn't seem to have thought of letting anyone else do research. But please keep careful notes and keep me apprised. So, should I just throw the tournament then? I asked. Dumbledore shook his head. Beside the fact that the contract with the goblet might be considered broken if you don't compete with an honest intention to do well, the challenges are structured in such a way that you would have more control of the outcome should you be in the lead by the end of the events. That is, if you do nothing, you might give Maeve an unstoppable lead in the scores, but if you remain in good standing, you can choose later to maneuver Ms. Delacour to victory should that be necessary. Got it. Do well enough that I can kneecap Maeve in the finals, I nodded. Maybe with an iron crowbar, Mathilda grinned. Why, I mimicked. No response, so I winced and asked, too soon. I realized that nobody in the room would be keeping up with recent Olympics figure skating drama and shrugged. Anything else? Dumbledore looked at the others and said, I don't believe so. I do apologize, Harry, that your birthday has once again been filled with difficulties. I'm used to it at this point, I sighed. Speaking of which, seeing as it is my birthday and my time with Thilda was rudely interrupted, and she'd be a big help catching my roommates up on all of this. Can we get her a pass home for the night? McGonagall pursed her lips a bit but nodded. Seeing as she is an adult, I can allow it. Mind that you have class second period, Miss Grimblehawk, and you have work tomorrow morning, Moody grumbled. Getting to skip exams doesn't mean you can skip out of the business. You guys are great, I told them, and grabbed Mathilda's hand before anyone could think to object. Since everyone in Dumbledore's office was keyed into the Fidelius on our house, we didn't even have to whisper the address into the headmaster's fireplace as we tossed in flue powder. I stepped out of the fire into our den first, and noted Percy sprawled out on one of the couches, reading a thick tome. He glanced over the top of the book and said, I had expected you either earlier or much later. When Mathilda stepped out of the fire behind me, he raised an eyebrow and asked, How did you get permission for that? Welcome home, Mathilda. Thilda, Penny shouted from the living room after overhearing even over her TV show. She ran in and gave Mathilda a hug, not having had the opportunity to see her since school started. I know you're not going to believe this, I joked, but something weird happened at Hogwarts on my birthday. How bad is it? Percy sighed, bookmarking his page and giving us his full attention. Harry's the Triwizard champion, Mathelda explained. For Durmstrang, she gave it a beat, then summed up. Bellatrix teaches there. She put him in. Maeve is Hogwarts champion. It's a whole fairy conspiracy. You better explain the whole thing, Penny suggested, sitting down next to Percy on the couch. We cuddled up on the other couch while explaining the evening and our suppositions. I hadn't been wrong that Mathelda was a huge help. Even with it all figured out, I couldn't actually voice a lot of what my godmother had said. I needed a way to break a gesh. I expected it to come up a lot. Penny and Percy had their own issues about all the things at work they couldn't talk about. After a couple of false starts, Penny was able to offer. We can explain that all to our bosses, if that's okay. I can't tell you what we've been working on, but it's information that might help. I shrugged. Since this whole fairy thing isn't Dumbledore's conspiracy to run like the Order of the Phoenix and the Voldemort stuff is, I don't see why not. Maybe yell at them about letting the Ministry use the Goblet of Fire instead of a nice political steering committee to pick the champions. Speaking of Voldemort stuff, Percy said, I had a thought. Myrtle Warren. Was her death purely because she was getting too close to his modifications of the school plumbing, or did he also need her death to create a Horcrux? I thought about it and said, she was killed with acromantula venom, though not the killing curse. They found acromantula venom in her system, he corrected. He showed me the title page of the book he'd been reading, which was on magical forensics. Investigative magic has, it turns out, a very difficult time distinguishing when someone has been poisoned to cover up the use of the killing curse. Ha, can I read that after you're done? I nodded, then thought out loud. He also stunned her with the baby basilisk before poisoning her and then maybe cursing her to death. That seems overly elaborate for anyone except Tom Riddle, but for him it about tracks. If he used her death to do double duty to make an early Horcrux, she might have noticed an object he was carrying. Or maybe Hagrid or someone else who was around then might know of something important to him at the time. We already checked everything in the trophy case, Penny reminded us. We'd done that as soon as someone had remembered that Tom Riddle had gotten a trophy for framing Hagrid. Well, Hagrid's pet acromantula for Myrtle's murder. I'll ask Hagrid, Mathelda offered. All waited until she realized that she was the only one of us that currently had regular access to the school, and whined, and I'll ask Myrtle. You guys, she's the worst. Well then, I smiled, giving her a squeeze. Perhaps I can give you a reward in advance for your wearying ghost interrogation, Penny yelled. Wait. Thilda has to catch me up on at least some of what's been going on at school. You have all night to sneak upstairs to have sex. Percy added, and remember silencing charms this time. Chapter 52, Holy Grail 9, Triple Dragon. Chapter text weighing stations. Could they have picked a bigger classroom? I grumbled to Carlin Creevy as the boy led me to the location where the weighing of the wands was to take place. The room was smaller than many of the other unused classrooms we'd long used for study sessions. I was already unhappy about the situation. I'd been told this event was on November 13th, which was Sunday, but it had wound up getting delayed to the next Tuesday afternoon. Moody hadn't been happy that I'd needed to leave in the middle of the workday. Carlin, who seemed thrilled to be part of the whole ridiculous journalistic process, even if it was just to meet me at the entry hall and lead me to the right spot, shrugged. Think they'll let me take pictures? You're my personal photographer, right? I winked at him. Nothing much had happened in the 2 weeks between the naming of the champions and this little bit of theater for the press. I'd worked some cases with Moody, read the forensics book once Percy was done with it, and come up with zero theories for anything actually pressing in my life. Well, I'd finally found an evening to go to the movies and see Pulp Fiction, so that had been fun. I was aching to baffle Death Eaters by loudly proclaiming Bible verses at them during my next firefight. Other than Maeve and Fleur, the small classroom with desks pushed back and a couple of cloth-draped tables to make a nice-looking backdrop for photos held 3 adults, Ludo Bagman, a male photographer I didn't recognize, and Rita Skeeter. The gossip columnist's bright yellow hair was nicely set off by her magenta robes, and I could tell I had her attention by how her large square glasses moved to frame me as I walked in. Ah, here he is, Bagman barked, ahead of Rita making her way over to me. Everyone's here in plenty of time. The rest of the judges and our expert will be here in a few moments. He took a breath and asked, everyone clear on what's going on? Examination of your wands, or in Mr. Dresden's case, focusing items to make sure they're functional and legal for the first event. Then a bit of a photo shoot for the papers, all in good fun. Is this an open press event? I asked, gesturing at Colin behind me. I have Hogwarts' best photographer here to take pictures for the school. Rita looked like she might object, but then offered, fine with me, as long as you're willing to give me an interview, Harry. Always have time for you, Rita. I nodded. I suggested to Colin, why don't you talk to Rita's photographer and get some tips? Smiling her typical predatory smile, which I was beginning to believe she couldn't help, Rita grabbed my elbow and escorted me toward the classroom's closet. Let's get away from all that noise. Rita, I'm not going in a broom closet with you, I disagreed, giving her a wink. People will talk, hallway okay. Having gotten the closet open and realizing that it would indeed be very cramped, she nodded. Good suggestion. I followed her out into the hall, which was completely empty. Small benefit of the annoying delay to a weekday, at least. Lovely. Standard interview setup okay? Asked, already withdrawing her floating recording station with the poison green dictaquill. Mathilda had finally explained to me why people didn't like quick quotes quills. There would be no unaltered record of our conversation to review if I had an issue with the article. Since I didn't trust Rita to hang on to an unaltered transcript, even if I forced her to use a regular dictaquill, I was willing to spot her the time savings she accrued by purpling up her prose live. Suits me, I agreed. Again, lovely, she said, starting the interview. Rita Skeeter, interviewing Harry Dresden, 19 years old, on the 15th of November, 1994. I wasn't happy about the date change either, I told her, watching her quill scratching away. Some of us have bosses annoyed we're missing work, rather than getting to skip class. Ah, yes, she said, letting me lead the interview for the moment. I had heard that you and retired Aura Alistair Moody, note to find out his age, if relevant, had started a business together. Private auras, isn't it? What does that mean? What do you do? I smiled and explained. He's been a great mentor so far, and I'm glad he was willing to take me on as an apprentice. We've basically been looking into situations the Aura Force doesn't have time for. And we do some standard private investigation for muggles, finding lost items, that kind of thing. They believe we use fully non-magical techniques, of course. Of course, she agreed. And is this business because you are unable to work as an official aura due to the Doom of Damocles? Right to the hard questions, Rita. I laughed, hoping it didn't sound too fake and practiced. It would have hurt if I hadn't been expecting it, but I was basically over the injustice of the whole thing and had been expecting the muckraking journalist to try to go for a low blow. Yes, though I understand minute scores would have put me at the top of the incoming aura class, due to a mistaken assumption that I was to blame for my mentor's death. I'm banned from holding a ministry job. It would be easy enough to lift if the ministry wanted to, but as I said, I'm enjoying private practice, so it hasn't been a priority. Let's move on to even more current events. I'm sure none of my readers expected you, a Hogwarts graduate, and I believe substitute professor, to be eligible to compete at all, much less for Durmstrang. How did that come about? I'm someone's ringer, I shrugged. I didn't realize that my godmother was a teacher at Durmstrang. She'd apparently been filing her rare visits, where she'd sometimes show me a few spells as private tutoring within the framework of Durmstrang. So even though I didn't know, I was technically enrolled at a school I'd never been to. And for some reason, the goblet lets your godparents enter you, even when you're an adult. It's not a great system, and I'm pretty upset about it, honestly. Your godmother, who is none other than Bellatrix Lestrange, née Black. I wasn't surprised she knew. I just wondered how long she knew. I'd prepared, as soon as I'd seen her list her age in several of her articles. Well, you're clearly familiar with my background, right, Rita? Since you were in the same school year as my mother and my godmother, I probably ought to be asking you questions about them. Wasn't that fun, to discover that the connection she'd hit me with about my grandmother nearly a year earlier had been something she'd known about since school? Ah, yes. Fast friends, Margaret McGregor and Bellatrix Black, as I recall. She audibly gulped. not wanting me to ask any more questions. I hadn't confirmed with the staff if she went to Hogwarts, in which case it would be hard to assume she'd been anything other than in Slytherin, and thus roommates with the two most notorious female Death Eaters. Perhaps equally embarrassing for her career as an elite journalist would have been if she hadn't been good enough to get into Hogwarts. She finally settled on, "So you don't think this is another Death Eater plot?" "Not this time," I shook my head. "I have a life outside of those guys, you know. I think my godmother just wants me to win the tournament. It would look good for the school it turns out she's been teaching at the very least." She was clearly trying to figure out where to pivot next, after being wrong-footed on her attempt to implicate me in Bellatrix's nonsense, when we spotted the three school heads, Umbridge, and another old man turn the corner and head toward us. "I guess that's our time for now, Harry. I'm sure you're going to make this tournament interesting." "Ah," Dumbledore announced as we got closer. "I'm glad to see the press has found time to get interviews, but we must get started." He waved us both into the classroom and then led the rest of the group in after us to get seated at the tables with the fancy tablecloths. "May I introduce Mr. Ollivander?" He gestured at the old man, whom some of you may not be familiar with. He's Britain's most esteemed wand maker, and he'll be checking the champions' foci to make sure they're in good condition for the tournament. Met Ollivander briefly when Percy and I had been going basically everywhere in Diagon Alley out of boredom the previous summer. He was a strange, skinny old man with odd grey eyes. He moved over by one of the room's windows and asked for Fleur to step up first. He had excellent magical senses and identified her wand core as Vila Hair. "One of my grandmothers," she confirmed. He pronounced it in working order after summoning some flowers from it, then suggested, "Miss Malfoy next, please." Maeve sashayed over, turning over a pale, somewhat short wand. The old man pronounced, "Rowan Wood, 10 inches even with a unicorn tail hair as the core. An excellent dueling wand, hard to turn to the dark arts. Not one of mine." "Made in Ireland," she said, allowing everyone to assume her backstory without having to lie about it. "It's full of old spells," he observed, placing the wand by his ear as if listening. "Inherited." The echoes of its past glory speak louder than any recent castings. Maeve just shrugged. I rolled my eyes. Ollivander was all but confirming my suspicion that she couldn't actually cast spells like a witch normally would. I wondered if it was just an old Malfoy wand, or whether she'd had it for some other reason. Hell, maybe she'd killed someone in Ireland to take their wand for cover. Ollivander waved the wand and summoned an image of a rowan tree that hung in the air for a moment before dissipating. "I'm not certain it's the best possible wand for you, young lady. Do feel free to come by my shop for a better fitted one. But if it's been working for you, I suppose it is functional." He gave the wand back, and she returned to lounging insouciantly against a wall. "Mr. Dresden, this could take a minute," I grinned. I then proceeded to start unloading foci onto one of the desks that had been pushed up against the wall near Ollivander's window. I had quite a few items to put down. I listed off as I placed them down: sulfur focus, motion staff, blasting rod, shield bracelet, light amulet, unlocking focus, locking focus, basic charms focus. Each one went on the surface with a thunk. I made most of these myself, except the amulet and the unlocking focus. "My, quite the young enchanter," he said, clearly not expecting me to lay out an arsenal. He, of course, went for the apologies focus first, since it was the most like a wand. Unicorn horn with a phoenix feather core. Astounding. Not a true wand, but making excellent use of the properties of the materials. The core is from Albus Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken, making it only the third such that he has granted. He only made it through the staff and rod, with an interested hesitation over my mother's amulet, before announcing, "I sense no permanent enchantments on any of these, so can confirm that they are valid tools for this challenge." I'm always interested to see foci that others have made for themselves. With a flourish, he utterly failed to get the unicorn horn focus to do anything, clearly unfamiliar with the sulfur-based charms it could cast, or just using non-wand foci in general. "Yes, quite," he hedged, setting it back down and stepping back. Dumbledore stood up. "Very good, then I guess we can get everyone back to class or their jobs." "Photos, Dumbledore, photos," Bagman objected. The worst part about the photos were the group shots. I didn't love being stuck that close to Maeve, especially since her own she aura seemed to interact with Fleur's Velar allure, with me stuck in the middle of what felt like the moments before a lightning strike as the two energies fought for dominance. But with a nearly 7-foot guy and two relatively tall but slight young women, there was no chance I could just stand off to the side. The photographer seemed challenged enough, finding a position in the small room where he could get us all in the same frame. Colin was having a great time snapping photos like a real professional. I privately suspected that his were going to turn out better. In a lull while the photographer was changing out film, Maeve hissed at me. "Did you see the badges that have been going around the school?" She showed me a button that was pinned to her robe, green with silvery text that read, "Maeve Malfoy support the real Hogwarts champion nice," I told her, not letting her bug me. Lot of text for such a small button. Probably hard to read unless they have their face right in your chest. Who made those? Draco, she smirked, trying to dig in the knife. Oh, yeah. He wrote me a letter about that asking for permission. Wasn't sure he'd gone through with it. Did you see the secret feature? What? She asked, nonplussed. I reached over and tapped her button with my index finger, putting in a bit of magic, and it immediately swapped to a red background with gold text that read, "Dresden rocks, good kid, that Draco. Secret agents. I think Rita really likes you," Mathelda observed, from the booth we'd settled at in the Three Broomsticks. The weekend after the weighing of the wands was a Hogsmeade weekend, so I'd shown up to see her, and we'd already seen basically all the shops she wanted to visit. Other than the access to magical goods, the town wasn't really that exciting to grown-ups that could go shopping whenever, most of the time. We'd, in particular, really enjoyed exploring the various eating establishments near our house, and Hogsmeade's options of 2 pubs and a tea shop were not up to that standard. "What makes you say that?" I asked. She pulled a copy of the Daily Prophet out of her bag and showed it to me. It was clearly Rita's article based on the weighing of the wands, and had several of the pictures we'd taken that day. Or maybe she likes me. You're barely in a love triangle at all. I skimmed the article to what she was talking about. "Ha, I kind of come off as a sexy Scandinavian spy," I observed. Rita hadn't actually invented too much, but she'd phrased my connections to Durmstrang with some heavy implications. Nice attempt to link me to the city of Dresden in Germany. Dad was American, but why let that stop her? "Oh yeah, I see what you're saying." She wasn't quite willing to say that I'm sleeping around on you with Fleur and Maeve. She nodded. "I heard she asked around on the way out. Good thing you were so bad at dating before I grabbed you. Nobody seriously thought you'd even flirted with anyone but me, other than those rumors Maeve started." I wonder how much of this is that I've gotten on her good side by basically not fighting her too hard on giving interviews, and how much is that she's afraid to offend your family. "We're not that powerful," she shook her head. "But I guess Dad could sue. You know, if she did actual slander. Libel, the written one." "Libel," I said. "I think it's the same Latin root as books." "Right, that. There aren't a lot of laws about printing, but the paper doesn't want to fight something they'd lose for sure." I finished skimming the articles and said, "She didn't bang the drum about my godmother either. Mentioned the business, so maybe we'll even get to treat it as an advertisement. I'm going to assume that she likes me." Before we could continue that conversation further, a mop of red hair rose above the wall between booths, and Ron Weasley said, "Psst, what's up?" I asked. "I didn't tell you this," he whispered, "but Charlie is in town with his coworkers for the first task." He tapped his head as if to tell me to think about it, then sunk back down behind the divider. "Thanks, Ron," I said. Our lunch order showed up slightly after that, Madame Rosmeter dropping off the dishes with a wink and a statement of, "Might be a scorcher of a competition next week, huh, Harry?" "I can take the heat, ma'am," I told her, then started digging into my meal. As we were finishing eating, Alexis tumbled out of the fireplace and stopped by the table to chat for a minute. "Can't stay long. I'm still working. Have to check on the stadium setup for the first task. It's going to need a lot of space. Good thing we cleared the spiders out of the forest last year, though you might find some even worse monsters there right now if you went for a look. Anyway, see you both later." We were getting ready to head out when Hagrid stopped by the table. "Going on a stroll, why, a limp? You know Madame Maxim tonight." "Congrats, Hagrid," I told him. "If ye two wanna meet at my hut around sunset, we could make it a double date or something. Might be things worth seeing in the forest." He tapped his nose, very obviously, then headed out. Anyway, Mathilda told me once we were back strolling outside in the November damp chill and out of immediate earshot of anyone else, I talked to Myrtle and Hagrid. How'd that go? I think she's finally figured out that Tom Riddle killed her, but she still has a hell of a crush, she scoffed. Got her talking about his stuff. Main thing she could remember was a book, like a little black journal with paper like Muggles write in. Ha, I said. I didn't know they had pre-printed blank diaries in the 40s, but I guess it makes sense. Probably pretty easy to make your own if they didn't. Could be. She says she saw him writing in it a lot. I think he may have killed her because she noticed. She thought he was keeping something really interesting in there. Admits she tried to take a peek. I thought about it and suggested might have been his first spellbook. Severus Snape was inventing spells in the margins of his potions textbook. Maybe young Tom was inventing spells that would get him expelled or taking notes on his basilisk hatching experiments. Hagrid remembered it too, she added. Not until I mentioned it, but he couldn't think of any other objects. It's thin. It's something, I assured her. Worst thing that happens is we tell Dumbledore about it and he says, "Oh yeah, I confiscated that. It was his Sherlock Holmes fan fiction, very graphic." I have no idea what you just said, my girlfriend giggled, but I bet it's gross. No porn like repressed Victorian British porn, I agreed. Did I tell you we finally found the Black Manor pornography collection? Bob was ecstatic. I keep having to order him to not tell me what was in it. She changed the subject. You want to take me on a romantic walk, where I'm the smallest person by far? Might as well, I shrugged. We wandered back onto the Hogwarts grounds out of Hogsmeade. Argus Filch was watching the gate, and he nodded at me. Harry, dragons. Thanks, Argus. I nodded at him. We were on a first-name basis, now that we were both grown-ups and staff. It was a little weird, but I was getting used to the idea that adults were more than last names. The sun set in Scotland way before dinner in November, so leaving after lunch and taking a long walk across the town and grounds, we were almost late to Hagrid's double date. He'd spiffed himself up with a big flower for about an ear and had tried to comb and pomade his hair. It was something. He had Madame Maxime on his arm, and she, as always, looked well put together. It was interesting that he'd gone full mountain man with his giant heritage, while she looked like the classy French lady she was, just at the wrong scale. Just goes to show you, people are people, no matter their background. Ye'll all enjoy this, Hagrid assured us. Worth seeing, trust me. Ani darn go tellin' anyone I showed ye right. None ye're a supposed turn no. I'm pretty sure we're checking the forest to see how it's recovered after the acromantulas were driven out, I agreed. And take a lovely walk in the woods with our friends. Exactly, Hagrid beamed, leading the way. We walked for a while through the woods, needing to use Hagrid's magical lantern that I'd made him and various other light charms to see at certain points, before we started to hear yells and roars. The thing that surprised me most was that they'd talked the centaurs into letting them knock down enough trees for the encampment. Couple dozen very serious, athletic people were running around trying to manage the 3 dragons in the clearing. Chinese fireball isn't as big as I thought, Mathilda observed, nonchalant, when the biggest of the dragons came into view. Guess the mothers aren't as big on that breed. Oh, I think that's Donna. She's one of my family's Welsh greens. If you face her, be nice. She's a sweetie. The Swedish short snout doesn't look like any trouble. We let Hagrid and Maxim get closer while we hung back. Plausible deniability was the year's motto after all. Charlie Weasley spotted Hagrid and suggested he stay back, since the dragons could breathe fire 20 feet. Eventually, they wound up stunning 2 of the dragons, giving Charlie time to talk to Hagrid and chide him about bringing Madame Maxime on a date. After all, she wasn't supposed to know and tell Fleur. He winked at us once he spotted us further back in the tree line. After Hagrid asked just a ridiculous ton of questions about dragons that I was sure he already knew all the answers to, we started strolling back. C88 fantastique, Maxim observed as we returned. Thank you for this, Rubius. We're nothing, he shrugged. Shame they didn't bring Norberta, but I darn think she's brooding yet. The French half-giantess looked a bit confused in the dark as the 3 of us got a wistful look about Hagrid's baby dragon from 3 years prior. Sexing dragons was difficult, and it turned out the Norwegian ridgeback he called Norbert had been female. Can we get them to keep Donna around after? Mathilda asked. She'd be great to show to the new classes. I darn see why not, Hagrid shrugged, clearly happy for an excuse to keep a dragon around the campus. Write your stepmom for permission. On it, she assured him. She suddenly realized something and exclaimed, Maeve better not wind up against Dana. She'll hurt her. Yeah, this whole thing feels kind of barbaric, I agreed. I'm assuming we don't need to kill the dragons, but things could go wrong. Hagrid shrugged. He clearly didn't know what the actual challenge was other than that it involved us all getting our own dragon to face in some way. We bid them farewell at the tree line, and I started to walk Mathilda back to the castle as a shadowy figure stumbled out of the forest. I had my blasting rod drawn, and she had her wand out and covering me before we recognized Headmaster Karkaroff. Good reflexes, he told us, once he was in conversational distance. He had his own wand to hand, but not pointed at us. I have news. The first challenge is dragons. We just stared at him like we just stared at everyone else being helpful and secretive all day. After all, Charlie had warned us as soon as he heard I'd been drawn as a champion. I just sighed. Thank you, sir. I wondered how many more people would warn me before the event. Triple Dragon, while I'd been nonchalant about the dragons over the weekend, Tuesday morning brought the jitters. Part of that was that they'd moved up the task by 2 days. The 24th, when they'd said we were doing the task, was a Thursday. I assumed the organizers had just put dates on the events so they could change them and mess with me. But the main reason for my anxiety was that dragons were dangerous. Even Dana, who Mathilda assured me was just a sweetheart, was a multi-ton flying death machine with breath nearly as hot as FiendFyre and an extreme resistance to spells. And they weren't even letting me wear my enchanted coat. As I was led down to the arena that they'd set up on one of the edges of the forbidden forest, I considered my options. I'd watched the dragon handlers stun them, so it was just a question of whether I could hit as hard as a half-dozen wizards before the dragon got me. I thought it was actually possible, but it wouldn't be impressive. The reality was that this wasn't a competition, it was a game show. The object wasn't just to accomplish the goal, but also to entertain the audience. I was pretty sure that Maeve would do something flashy with ice and illusions. That would either be very useful or very weak against a dragon, probably depending on how hot its fire got and how good its senses were. I wasn't totally sure about Fleur, but what little I'd seen of her casting at the World Cup debacle, I expected subtle. We finally stopped moving after traveling around the edge of the forest, where a large tent was set up. I was pretty sure we were just on the other side of where the dragons had been kept, which we'd approached from inside the forest the other night. I realized they'd put up stands, since I could hear the hubbub of the crowd. I felt like we were still just inside the Hogwarts grounds, so the fortune wards would probably keep any of us from actually getting killed. Prevent us from getting horribly burned. Maybe not so much. Hoss! McGonagall had been calling me a couple of times, and I'd been lost in thought. Hoss, are you ready for this? If I'm not too late now, right? I told my grandmother, probably not reassuring her. I noted a shimmer in the air that traced an arc through the air over the tent and asked, wards up to keep the crowd from getting injured. Albus erected them himself, she confirmed. I pressed, keep in smoke and fire, do you think? Potentially, she allowed. Perhaps a bubblehead charm if you expect to give the dragon a number of opportunities to incinerate you. If I had to rely on the wards, I was down to something like Plan E, but it was good to know that I had the option if the better ideas fell through. Before I could grill her further, she held open the back flap of the tent for me to enter. Strangely, it wasn't a space-expanded tent, just a non-magical, if large, pavilion. Fleur was already sitting on a stool inside looking nervous, while Maeve was standing nonchalantly across the room. 3 beds and a chest of healing supplies filled one wall of the tent, with the Mediwitch herself trying to look unobtrusive. Hopefully we wouldn't be needing her services. Bagman was waiting in the middle of the room. "Goodo!" he exclaimed as I entered. He was still wearing his old and ill-fitting Quidditch team robes. As the sounds of the crowd intensified outside, he explained the challenge, acting as if it was a big mystery that it was dragons. He finally remembered to tell us that the point of the challenge was to collect a golden egg that the dragons were sitting on, mixed in with their natural eggs. We draw from a sack to determine our order. I'd say ladies first, but there are 2 ladies, so let's just go alphabetical, Bagman decided. Fleur, you're first whether we go by first name or last name, So here you go." He held out the purple silk bag, and she drew a tiny green dragon labeled with the number 2. The token was animated and very cute. "Be nice to Dana," I told her. "She's a sweetheart, according to my girlfriend." Fleur bargled. "She is not joking." I shrugged, then took my turn with the bag. It was rather easy to determine that the 2 remaining tokens were different sizes. I could have gone with the smaller one, but I figured that would be first, and thus, when the judges would be the most conservative with their points to see how everyone else did. Maeve could probably put on a big finish and win. I grabbed the bigger one, pulling a brilliant red figure with the number 3 on it. "Only one left for you, Maeve." Bagman let her take the blue figurine with the number 1. "And that means you're up first." "Thrilling," she shrugged. "Well, I'm announcing and judging," he told us. "So just head out when you hear the whistle. One for each of you. Maeve, why don't you walk out with me real quick?" With that, Bagman took his leave, Maeve following behind him. It was suspicious. He probably wanted to talk to her for some reason. To throw her off a bit, I suggested, "Break a leg," as she sauntered out, getting me an irritated look. "You ready?" I asked Fleur, when it was just the 2 of us waiting, with, of course, Madame Pomfrey at hand for healing purposes. "I think so," she tried to convince herself. "The Welsh green is not so bad. I am going to put it to sleep." "Could work," I told her, not that surprised. Glad I didn't plan on stunning mine. That would be embarrassing if we both tried the same thing. "Don't worry, you'll do great. Just make sure it's all the way asleep before you get too close. Watch the claws, and don't forget your flame-freezing charms." I was just sharing the suggestions Mathilda and I had worked out if I decided to stun mine. Dragons could be dangerous even in their sleep. They sometimes snored fire. "Thanks, Harry. It's almost like you want me to win." She was momentarily distracted by the sounds of a roaring dragon from outside and the glacial snap of Maeve casting frost spells. "Hey, I didn't ask to be in this competition, and nobody even likes Maeve. It's your competition to lose." I smiled at her. "Oh, can I trade you for your dragon token after the match? I think Mathilda would love to have a tiny Dana." "That seems fair," she agreed. "You are a good boyfriend." "I'm trying." "Seen any more of Bill Weasley since the World Cup?" That got a wistful smile. "He thinks he is too old, but we are still writing letters. I'm trying to convince him to escort me to the Yule Ball. The boys at Hogwarts are unable to keep their eyes to themselves. I don't fancy spending all evening with one staring down my dress." "Hi, Carla. You're going to want it for the winter in Scotland anyway," I joked. "You mean it gets colder than this?" "I thought this area had a temperate climate." I shook my head. Pretty sure they just built the castle up here because nobody ever wanted to freeze their butts off attacking it. We almost missed the second whistle. We'd gotten so busy talking. Fleur let out a small squeak, then headed out. It took her 10 minutes, most of it was very quiet. I suspected she was lurking on one side of the field building a ritual sleep spell. It wasn't that far off from my plan, so it was good that it seemed to work. Finally, there was an announcement of a score, clapping, and my whistle. I strode out and waved my staff at the crowd, which was the entire school mixed in with assorted adults in the temporary stands that ringed the non-forest side of the enclosure. I could tell where Gryffindor was because that part of the stands was going nuts. The ground in the enclosure was slightly hilly like the rest of the forest. The trees sheared off at ground level, and the ground cover mostly singed and stamped down from the dragons being kept penned for several days. Fortunately, it wasn't raining, or it would be a gross mud pit. As it was slightly damp, probably from Maeve putting up ice walls or something similar. It would do. A confused-looking red dragon had been attached by a long chain to the other end of the enclosure, crouched over her clutch of eggs. I could make out a gold twinkle mixed in. Just in case it was that easy, I incanted, "Accio, golden egg." No such luck. If they'd forgotten to ward against that, I'd have been very annoyed. Down to business then. I had a few rituals to manage, so I started making a circle and planning it out. First up, charms to protect me from flames and let me breathe. Wand users could do the flame-freezing charm and the bubblehead charm without a ritual, but I had to make do. Next up, a little transfiguration for my insurance plan. Finally, the big project. I stabilized a glob of earth, added runes, and enchanted it. This kind of thing wasn't going to last more than a few minutes, but that's all I needed. Penny and Percy had helped me with the arithmancy, and if this worked out, it might be a cool idea to take all the way to a real spell. The crowd was getting a little annoyed watching me sit in a ritual circle for 5 minutes, but they'd put up with the same from Fleur, and my finish was likely to be bigger than hers had been. Finally, I felt ready, broke my circle, and began walking toward the dragon. I could hear the murmur of the crowd rise in anticipation, but I tuned them out to focus on the dragon. Depulso, I started, using my staff to banish the ritual object at the dragon. It had a strong sticking charm, and the dragon didn't really register it as much of a threat, just turning a bit so it hit its shoulder and stuck. Dragons didn't have to fear much of anything that small, maybe even including high-caliber bullets. She probably would have scraped it off after a moment, but that's why I already had my blasting rod out, rushing forward and casting Incendio. Got the Chinese fireball's attention. A flying rock wasn't a threat, but my enormous gout of flame was at least potentially a challenge. She roared, and her own fires shot out of her mouth and nostrils toward me, billowing into a mushroom shape from their speed, and resembling the fireballs the dragon was named after. Right, dragon fire is fast. Bombarder. I yelled, just blowing up a whole chunk of turf and a tree stump into an impromptu barrier. Nothing like a cloud of earth to stop a flamethrower. I still had to duck down, as the force of the blast sent little bits of charred tree and hot rocks back my way. I split my focus a bit to notice that the crowd was going wild. Entertainment value was why I went with Plan A while I ducked. I hadn't really stopped moving, and as the ground landed from the explosion, I'd covered several yards of terrain and found time to launch a few more gouts of flame on the run. Mathilda had assured me that Chinese fireballs were basically the siege weapons of dragonkind. Their fireballs were powerful, but it took them a little while to charge up another blast. I believed her, but there's still a moment of real terror when you're sprinting over mostly open terrain relying on the super-hot breath weapon to have a cycle time. Fortunately, appropriately used strong emotion is good for magic power, so my own fear-fueled fireballs phased the flaming fiend. I was nervous enough to start alliterating. I really hoped the enchanted item was working. Hearing a big intake of breath that must mean the dragon had recharged, I dove for a small hillock and went prone behind it, raising my shield bracelet for extra protection. There was no way it could take dragonfire face on, but it might catch any spillover. I hit the ground hard, and didn't regret the bruising I was giving myself to avoid burns, as cinders that used to be part of the hill rushed over me, and the earth at my back shuddered from the impact of the flume of flame. And it was starting to get hard to see the dragon, for all the smoke. Perfect. I managed to roll to my feet and double back the way I'd come, loosing a few more of my own fire-making charms into the smoke where I could barely make out the dragon. I had a vague plan of diving into the hole I'd made with my exploding charm if I needed another barrier. But then the dragon tried to suck in air for another blast and started coughing. Yes, in normal circumstances, a dragon isn't going to be that inconvenienced by its own smoke. They usually don't stick around in one place. They live outside, and the force of the breath and wings will tend to send bad air away from them. But a clever wizard who's good at wind charms and object-attracting jinxes and has a middle school science education can make that less of a foregone conclusion. The glob of earth I'd stuck to her was an anchor for a spell to suck smoke and carbon dioxide toward the dragon, with a bit of a side attempt of keeping flammable oxygen away. Even with fire that was mostly magical, it still needed enough air to ignite, and the dragon had to breathe. If we'd actually needed to incapacitate the dragon, my plan had been to create enough smoke that the thing passed out. It would have been like Fleur's plan, only way more spectator-friendly. But since I just needed the golden egg, this whole process was a short con. After all, the thing still had teeth and claws if I tried to run in and take the egg. No, that's what my transfiguration was for. Fighting fire with fire had been a lovely distraction while my Darksea puppets flew in and stole the egg. Creating them was way easier in the room of requirement, but I'd made enough that I had the basic idea down, as long as I had the time. As I strode back toward the entrance, towering cloud of smoke at my back and flying constructs bringing the egg to my hand, I hoped it looked cool enough for a good score. The crowd, at least, seemed to appreciate it. I may have ruined the effect slightly when I let out a squeak, and frantically looked behind me as the dragon tried to get off one last fire blast before giving up and saving her energy. Chapter 53, Holy Grail 10, Book Club. Chapter Text Book Club. It turned out I'd been right about getting scored for entertainment value, but I'd underestimated how much it was rigged. Seriously, who thought that it was a good idea letting the headmasters, who'd be biased by default, account for 60% of the score? And both of the other judges were British. Maeve and Fleur were tied at 37 points, while I was at 44. Despite Fleur having a basically perfect run, on my advice not to let her guard down, I heard she'd avoided a jet of flame from her sleeping dragon. Only Dumbledore and Maxime scored her with 10s. Karkaroff had spiked her for not being from his school, Bagman dinged her for not being exciting enough, and Umbridge made some minor excuse for racist scoring. Meanwhile, Maeve had been very showy with her ice walls and illusions, but had taken a while to overcome the smallest dragon, and injured it, and destroyed an egg in the process. Dumbledore and Maxime took off points for that. Umbridge wasn't much more of a fan of her than she was of Fleur, but Karkaroff and Bagman gave her suspiciously high scores. I figured that Karkaroff was helping my godmother ensure one of us won over Fleur. Maybe Bagman just liked the spectacle, but I wondered if he was trying to adjust his gambling book with his own thumb on the scale. Mine were the only scores that seemed roughly even, 8 or 9 from every judge, except a 10 from Karkaroff. Before I headed over to the Gryffindor dorms for the after-party they were hosting for the Durmstrang students, I stopped in at Dumbledore's office. "An excellent showing, Harry," he observed from across his desk, "though I rather expect you could have ended it faster." I overestimated how much showmanship was worth, I agreed. Bagman seemed to be the only one grading on it, and he cares more about his gambling anyway. I was fiddling with the golden egg while I talked. I discovered that it was some kind of puzzle box. Supposedly it held a clue to the second task. Perhaps. Also, don't open that in here, please. Might give me a clue. I wondered, but I noticed a slight wince, as if anticipating that he wouldn't like it if it opened. "Is it going to be annoying? Perhaps try it while your roommates aren't in the house," he admitted. "Fine." I stopped tinkering with the egg. "Did Thilda tell you about the journal?" I hadn't had a chance to check in with him since Hogsmeade. He shook his head, so I explained. Myrtle remembered that Tom Riddle had a little black journal he was always writing in. If he used her death to make his first Horcrux, that could be an item of significance. His teenage grimoire. Perhaps a bit of a reach, the headmaster considered, and closed his eyes as if to aid in his own recall. After a few moments he said, "But I remember a similar book that he would always hide as soon as he saw me. Even if he didn't consider it a valuable enough possession to store his soul in, it might contain his research from the time. Not that it gives us much to go on. He must have amassed hundreds of tomes of dark magic in the subsequent years. Still gives us a place to start, if any of our friendly Death Eaters remember him handing it out. If my godmother comes to the party tonight, I can ask her." He sighed. "I'm not sure we can rely on Bellatrix's information with what I've discovered. Figured out what we agreed to with the tournament. As we suspected, by entering a champion of their own in the Triwizard tournament, they were, in essence, agreeing to settle their war via the competition rather than open battle. It was fairly common in the olden days, when enemies decided that their armies were evenly matched, and they would rather not see all of their warriors slaughter one another. I asked, "But what do they want as a concession if they win?" "What they've wanted since it was erected, the destruction of the Veil and full access to our world." I nervously spun the golden egg around in my hand. "What does that mean?" "Wargs and lucrators on every main street, the utter destruction of the statute of secrecy. Everyone has to worry about pixies stealing their shoes and brownies, charging them a gallon of milk to make new ones." Perhaps. I personally doubt it will be quite so apocalyptic, given the long-ranging plans that they've made to get this far. But we've lost so much knowledge about the Fae since they were locked away. I rather hope that most creatures of the Never-Never cannot freely cross between our world and theirs. At the very least, however, it will mean that the She will fully play a role in this world's politics, if only from the shadows. Plus, no more teleporting, I added. That caused him to blanch a bit. Indeed, I had not considered that problem. That would certainly upset the status quo if apparition and portkeys no longer provided wizards the ability to immediately respond to threats, no matter their location. I thought of an even bigger issue. If it takes out the flu network, suddenly this business of wizards living wherever they want and commuting across hundreds of miles to work every day stops. Arthur Weasley and Amos Diggory going to carpool by Broome every morning 150 miles from Devon to London. That really got him. He was only able to juggle his 3 careers due to the ability to pop over to the Ministry to oversee trials and go to wherever the International Confederation of Wizards met when he had to chair those meetings. I'll just try to make sure Fleur wins this tournament, and I shall attempt to find a way to declare the tournament invalid. We might honestly prefer fighting a war. He looked every one of his 100 and whatever years. But do please enjoy your victory party. I'll keep you apprised if there's anything else you can do. It was a short walk past the room of requirement to the Gryffindor common room, and I could immediately tell the difference from previous dorm parties. The room was at least a dozen Durmstrang students fuller, and that changed the dynamic a lot. In particular, it was obvious where Victor Crumb was, because all the house's Quidditch players and superfans were crushed into one side of the room. Harry. Hermione noticed me first, from the group that wasn't mobbing the professional seeker. But that set the room off, and suddenly there was a tremendous amount of noise in my honor. It was not a great time to have sensitive hearing, but I powered through. I held the golden egg up, for lack of other useful gesture, and the sound redoubled. Even the dour Durmstrang kids seemed thrilled that I'd won the event, for all that it was being treated as a Gryffindor victory. Maybe we'd see some long-term international cooperation after all. The event had been held early in the day, and it was a school day anyway, so the party couldn't be that ridiculous. But it was a good time, and I got to catch up with my younger friends outside, just teaching them in class. Speaking of which, Fred and George finally got me back for scaring them with the werewolf in my first newt class, and I spent half the party partially transfigured into a lion man, for both house pride and payback. I think I like it, Mathilda purred in my ear. You look like the guy from that telly show. You know, with the lady from Terminator. I didn't really know much about the show, but if she wanted to role-play Beauty and the Beast later, I'd be for it. At some point, I found myself sitting next to Crumb, shifted together by the rolling tides of popularity. He told me in his thick accent, I am glad it vas you. I have no interest in fighting dragon. Karkaroff seemed like he wanted you to be the champion, though, I said. Duh, he expects much. I checked. You weren't just sticking around in school an extra year for this, were you? He shook his head. Vit Quidditch schedule I lose credit hours. Is favor you also do me. It will be much easier to finish year not competing in tournament. Well, I'm glad it worked out, I assured him. Graduate, and it'll be a lot easier to work. He nodded, and seeing that there was a lull in the attention being paid us, he asked, By the way, do you know girl Vit curly brown hair? She is very pretty and seems unimpressed by my fame. I hear she is also very smart. I followed his eyes to Hermione, and I told him, she's only 15 though, and sort of taken. But if you're looking for a date to the Yule Ball, let me introduce you to my friend Katie. She's a really good chaser. As the party was winding down, I realized I hadn't seen my godmother at all, but Karkaroff had been quietly lurking in the corner to chaperone the whole time. I'd have to be more circumspect, since his loyalties weren't really certain. I understood that he'd betrayed the other Death Eaters, so probably wouldn't be interested in going back to them, but I didn't want to give him ammunition to trade for a return to Voldemort's favor. Still, he might know something that neither of my other contacts did. Fun event, I told him, dragging over a chair to sit next to him and keeping my voice low enough that we wouldn't be easily overheard. He agreed. All 3 of you did well. Good thing someone offed your former boss. Probably harder to visit Britain if he'd been running around. His expression closed off, but he grudgingly nodded. It is better for all of that to be behind us. You know how paranoid Dumbledore is, right? I suggested, and he regarded me for a moment before giving a slight nod. We're trying to tie up some loose ends. You know, make sure nobody else in the group can find out his secrets to replace him or bring him back again. Wise enough, was all he gave me. I ploughed on. I hear from my godmother that he might have given out various keepsakes at some point before his defeat in 81. Some of those items might be relevant. He thought about it for several seconds before offering. He gave me a dagger. I think, even then, he was asking whether I would stab him in the back, given the chance. He is a dangerous man. I was vaguely interested in the dagger, but I stayed on topic. You didn't happen to see if anyone got a book, supposedly a thin little Muggle-style black diary. He might have kept some of his important notes as a student in it. That got a stifled bark of laughter. Am I supposed to do with a blank book? Write my life story, he quoted, and he did a pretty good impression of an upper-class British accent. You should talk to Lucius. Please tell me what he looks like when he realizes it was full of his master's secrets, if he had just figured out the trick. I smirked. I'll do that. Thank you, sir. I guessed I was paying another trip to Lucius Malfoy. The real question was whether I'd risk bringing my boss, since they got along like a house on fire. FaceTime, I thought the Dark Lord was marking me, Lucius Malfoy complained. A blank Muggle journal, his childhood name embossed on it, and a taunting sense of powerful dark magics, but nothing. Every test I tried to reveal its secrets failed. I did everything short of defacing the pages, but that would be indelible proof that I had not simply hidden it away as he asked. I'd sent an owl to Lucius, and a few days later he'd consented to meet me at his house. I decided not to bring Moody, particularly to his actual house. We didn't need it to be on fire at this juncture, that it was me saying that convinced my boss I had a good point. My godmother had put in an appearance, and after some pleasantries we jumped right to the particulars. Maybe it was her presence or Moody's absence, but Lucius had been more forthcoming, especially since we knew what to ask about. Nope, could be a Horcrux, I told him. Bellatrix had assured me he was read in and as invested as she was in making sure Tom Riddle didn't keep popping back up. Fascinating, to put a piece of his soul in such a cheaply made object. I never would have imagined. He truly seemed shaken up. So, you still have it? I pressed, knowing that there was no way my life was that easy. Unfortunately, no, he told me, to nobody's great surprise. Remember Arthur Weasley's raids 2 years ago? I made a point to dispose of everything that might lead to accusations from his people. A Muggle journal that radiated dark magic would be precisely the kind of thing the misuse of Muggle artifacts department would hone in on. In fact, I seem to recall encountering you and your friends at the ice cream shop shortly after I sold the last of the lot. I boggled at him. You're quite possibly the richest wizard in Britain. You couldn't just, I don't know, put it in a safety deposit box somewhere. That's what she did, I indicated my godmother. The goblins have always liked her better. They might have asked even harder questions than the ministry would, he disagreed, his headshake making his long, silvery hair flutter. And placing it in a Muggle institution would have been extremely risky. There are wizards that make a habit of locating unattended magical objects. Without wards, even a vault door would be of little consequence. How are there any wizards that are poor? I wondered, not able to refute his logic. I'd often considered myself how good even a first year at Hogwarts would be at robbery. He shrugged. Lack of ambition, courage, and knowledge of how to launder money. I don't understand it either. Mostly tuned out for the conversation, Bellatrix finally asked, Where'd you sell it, Lucius? Borgians. Yes, as part of a parcel lot. I didn't call out the book, so it's unlikely he would have sold it to his usual clientele. So he either threw it away or just sold it to anyone, and might not have even kept a record. I was just shy of swearing. What do you think the chances are he'd tell me what he knows? Field trip. My godmother bounced up, suddenly interested. He wouldn't tell me, he will. I'll make you a deal, Harry dear. I feel like promenading. No more need to cloak and scuttle down the alley. I need to check my vaults. We'll see if my husband has moved the cup. I'll see if there's anything else I might want in there, and then we'll go see Borgin. You and that morally upstanding business partner of yours can be my insurance against disagreements with the auras. Sounds like a plan to me, I said, wondering what her angle was. Call Moody. We'll go after lunch. I actually managed to pull that off, but Moody insisted on wearing his invisibility cloak and shadowing us, just in case. I'd given him the quick rundown, and he was extra suspicious. But I was happy enough to have him on overwatch as I strolled down Diagon Alley in the shadows. Early in December, the sun set in London around 4 in the afternoon, so the shadows of the taller buildings were immense even before then. There was light enough, though, for several people to recognize my godmother and scamper away in fear. However, it was a straight shot to Gringotts, and we got there without being stopped. The goblin at the desk seemed as startled as the people on the street. Madam Lestrange, dear me, how can I help you today? Well, you see, I have all these muggle cashier's checks, and I wanted to inquire about the exchange rate for turning them into galleons, she said, sarcasm dripping off of her voice. I wish to enter my vault, obviously. You have identification, the goblin tried. I wasn't sure what Lucius Malfoy had done that the goblins liked his sister-in-law better. Lots of polyjuiced impostors visiting banks for vaults long untouched, she wondered. I've never been asked to identify myself before. We have heard that someone has been buying up Boomslang's skin and bicorn horn of late, the teller shrugged. And your wand will do, madam. He held out a trembling hand. Almost faster than I could see her move, her wand was drawn and pointed at the center of the goblin's forehead from a foot away. Take a close look. You shan't be touching it. She flipped a small golden key onto the counter. Now follow protocol and confirm that's the key to the Lestrange vault. Honestly, you act like notorious killers don't wander in off the street to check their vaults for the first time in over a decade all the time. Good, good. This all seems to be in order. The terrified goblin examined the key. I shall need the clankers. I tried to send him an apologetic look as he ran off to collect whatever that was. This is what Lucius doesn't understand, she explained to me while we waited, having once again stowed her wand. They don't care about polite. They don't like wizards. You just have to tell them what to do and expect them to do it. Always a teachable moment, huh, ma'am? I barely avoided rolling my eyes. Just helping you in business. I thought you had a moment of clarity earlier about why any wizard could be poor, but then I realized you already know the answer. It's your stupid attachment to ethics. You could do with knocking over a few muggle cash houses and learning to deposit the funds in a respectable bank. I'll consider it, I said, clearly lying. The goblin returned with a leather bag that seemed to be full of chains or something else that jingled, or clanked, I guessed, if the naming scheme was literal. I shall take you to your vault. I hadn't actually been to a vault in the bank before. I had heard about the mine carts, but I wasn't prepared for a ride for which you'd normally have to queue in line for half an hour at Six Flags Great America. I hadn't had much interaction with goblins, but they had to be as mad as wizards. No, wait, they had a blind dragon that you had to scare off with the quite literal clankers to get to the Lestrange vault. They were more mad than wizards. This is my second dragon battle this week. I yelled over the racket of the clankers as we progressed to the vault door. If only you'd had clankers for the first one, Bellatrix agreed. Would that work? I asked, rather doubting it. The goblin shook his head and said loudly, No, the Gringotts dragons are conditioned to fear the sound. Any other dragon would not have that response. Looking at the scarred, terrified beast, I didn't want to think about what conditioned meant. Charlie Weasley would probably be appalled. I knew Mathilda would be. I wouldn't mention it to her until after the holidays, so she would have a Merry Christmas. Ultimately, with the goblin's touch and the vault key, the immense door literally melted away, revealing a mostly unworked cave full of treasure. The wealth of the pureblood families was ridiculous, as was the fact that their money just sat in the ground. I'd left Muggle High School when I was 15, and I still had a better idea about investments and compounded interest than most of them seemed to. And despite the mountain of wealth, my godmother frowned. It's been picked over. The cup should be right over there, she pointed. Well, you'll simply have to track down Roddy and Rabby. Waste not, want not, she shrugged, and started grabbing other items of interest and putting them into her purse, which seemed to be as expanded as my bag of holding. I shan't force you to refuse charity, Harry. I know you'd be suspicious of a handout from me. She was kicking what had to be thousands of dollars worth of gold coins out of her way like so much trash as she said it. She wasn't wrong, but I'd never had the costs of my own moral code so blatantly pointed out to me. Right, to see a man about a diary, she ordered, having finished taking the arbitrary items that she was interested in. It didn't make sense that the ride out seemed to be just as fast as the ride in. Roller coasters weren't meant to go that fast uphill. I assumed that Moody had picked us back up as we left the bank. It would be hard not to. I'd heard about a few isolated Death Eater attacks since the World Cup, but none in the alley, so it had recovered somewhat from the pall that fell over it immediately after the event. Still, everyone had cleared out quickly at rumors of Bellatrix Lestrange about. At least, I assumed that was why the streets were almost zombie apocalypse levels of deserted when we stepped back out. My godmother stopped as soon as we walked out onto the stone steps in front of the bank and wondered, what? No auras surrounding us. I had assumed it would be here. It would make an excellent photograph. I could have called Rita, I suggested, fishing for information about whether she'd known the reporter. She sniffed, not giving me an answer. To our next stop then, but keep an eye out for the posse. It was nearing true sunset by the time we made it to Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley. The street outside, the disreputable magic shop, was not as deserted as the main thoroughfares, and I had no idea whether the few stragglers loitering were a normal number for a dark December afternoon, or whether word had preceded us. None of the not-so-innocent bystanders seemed inclined to try their luck against us. The haggling in the shop itself was almost anticlimactic, as Mr. Borgin stooped over to the counter, asked what we were looking for, and simply consulted a log book. Please remind Mr. Malfoy that this is not a pawn shop. I held on to his lot for as long as I could, in case he wished to purchase any back, but 2 years is a long time to wait. Ah, here we are. Assorted books were logged, but no specific record of a blank, black journal, I'm afraid. I'll have the boy check through the records and bookshelves. Is the need pressing? Only. A slightly oily bell started to ring a faint but repeating chime beneath the desk, and the proprietor glanced out of the grimy windows. I could see movement as well. No, simply owl me once you have more information, she assured him, noting the movement. Would you like to use the shop's flue, madam? He offered. She considered it, but clearly I'd been brought here as a useful prop, and she was interested in having it out with the auras. No, I suppose this is public enough it will have to do. Thank you, Mr. Borgin. Come along, Harry, let's do this properly. Suspecting we'd have been better off using the fireplace, I followed her out onto the dark and closed-in street, where only the remaining color of the sky made it obvious how black it had gotten in an alley that considered well-lit thoroughfares to be an affront to honest skullduggery. The shop behind us had a dim lantern over the door, and it was sufficient to make out the quartet of auras loosely spaced to trap us against the wall. Of course, it was Dawlish leading the crew. I recognized the other 3 as part of his usual squad that would show up to harass me. As soon as he had our attention, he said, Bellatrix Lestrange, I have a standing warrant for your arrest. Oh, Johnny, my godmother swapped into her annoying baby talk, is all this because I wouldn't go to Hogsmeade with you in 4th year? He ignored her. And tut, Dresden, I can have you on all kinds of conspiracy now that your relationship to this Death Eater is out. And coming out of such an establishment despite your parole. She sighed. Well, I'd hoped I'd get someone smart, like that nice Shacklebolt fellow, but if you're determined to take us in, I'm excited to get to pay my solicitor to make you look like an idiot. Oh, I know about your little deal with the fairies, he grinned, looking macabre in the flickering lamplight. And I'm very interested in how you pulled such a thing off. But I understand it only covers crimes committed up to the signing of the Accords. Pretty sure shopping isn't a crime, even in Nocturne Alley, I told him. I'm sure there's stuff we could dig up, he shrugged. But why would we have to? After all, we can pin the deaths of 3 auras on you. His 3 partners were as nonplussed by that statement as we were, and turned to look at him for confirmation. And that was all it took for 3 blasts of magic to take them all, from 3 different directions. One's neck was instantly opened up from the cutting curse. Another took a gout of nauseating purple flame, which instantly caused him to collapse to the ground. The last was decapitated by a powerful blasting curse to the base of the skull. It only took moments. I was covered in blood and bits of the aura's head, and in the light of the blast, I could make out the 3 other wizards spread out and covering us from the shadows of the alley. I was shocked that even Dawlish would do such a thing, but finally put the pieces together and groaned, Crouch. Barty Crouch Jr., whose plans seemed to always involve disguise, let his tongue flick out to moisten John Dawlish's lips. Took you long enough. Now we should have a talk, long overdue, about your plans, Bella. Shadow boxing, I shouldn't be blasé about watching 3 men murdered in a gruesome fashion not 10 feet from me. I was covered in bits of their blood and tissues. I should be screaming or vomiting, unable to focus, but I was steady if grossed out. Maybe it was adrenaline, and I'd fall apart later. Maybe I'd seen enough deaths that I had a strong stomach. Maybe it was just that I didn't particularly know or like the victims, for all that I wouldn't have wanted them dead. But maybe having my mentor's death on my soul had broken something fundamental in me. There was a good reason not to commit murder with magic, and the prime examples of it had us surrounded. I chanced a look at my godmother out of the corner of my eye. It was hard to make out her features, backlit as she was by the only light source in the alley where it shone from above the door behind us, but I suspected she was trying to play it cool. No matter how good she was, people got lucky in a fight, and given the 3 separate spells while Dawlish did nothing, they had to have 4 wands on us from the darkness. Now that we have your attention, Crouch continued, I'd like to talk about what you're up to and whether you killed the Dark Lord. And I order you to answer him. One of the other assailants, the one that had managed the cutting curse, shouted from the darkness. Is that you, Roddy, dear? She called into the shadows. I suppose that means the others are Rabbi and Antonin, yes. Sloppy, using your signature curse, Tony. You never taught it to anyone else. Enough passing information to the boy, Crouch told her, now that I knew our friends in the dark were the Lestrange brothers and Antonin Dolohov. In particular, Dolohov was supposed to be a champion duelist, and there was no telling whether he'd recovered his skills after half a year out of Azkaban. Way I see it, you have 4 outcomes. We kill you both, you run with aura deaths on you, we don't turn you in and just kill Dresden, or we leave both of you alive. That last is contingent on having a really good explanation for this fairy nonsense and cutting us in. But Barty, she argued, if I'd wanted you in, I could have invited you at any time. From the shadows, Rodolphus insisted, Bellatrix Lestrange, I am your head of house and you will cease this nonsense and share your plans. That's not very progressive, I told him. Might as well order her into the kitchen to go make you a sandwich. It was an arranged marriage, my godmother assured me. Not even consummated. Were I beholden to a head of house, it would not be you, dear. Good time to ask them about the thing, I asked her. Go ahead, Harry. What did you do with the cup? I asked, to the shadows on the left where the Lestrange brothers seemed to be lurking. How the hell do they know about the cup? Rabistan asked. Shut up, Crouch ordered. I know you're both skilled fighters, but you're surrounded, so you need to start taking this seriously and explaining. I thought back to Percy's invented term from earlier in the summer and argued, you see, that's where you're wrong. We're not surrounded, you're inverted, constant vigilance. Then all hell broke loose. I had thought exactly 2 seconds ahead and managed to pull off my clever plan to not die, shield charm with my left hand, levitating the body with the exploded head with my right, and moving quickly to the side. I caught 2 lesser curses on the shield and managed to intercept the green light of Crouch's screamed, Avada Kedavra, on the body. I didn't love using a murdered man as mobile cover, but he couldn't get any more dead, and I certainly could. To my right, my godmother was backing my play. We'd never actually fought as a team, but she knew what I was capable of, and that I was basically mobile armor to her heavy artillery. After the initial salvo that I managed to absorb, the 4 of them were having to take the effort to shield against Bellatrix's attacks around the edge of my shield. If we'd been alone, they would have been able to spread out and probably take us down, though my godmother might have killed a couple of them in the process. But we had backup, and more of it than I'd expected. It was hard to make out what was going on across the alley where it was pitch black and lit only by FiendFyre, but I heard voices that weren't just Moody's. The paranoid old man had grabbed additional backup of his own. I also heard even more voices that weren't the 4 Death Eaters in front of us, so they'd probably brought some additional backup as well. While it would superficially seem like we should have kept them all flanked between us, we had no cover but my shield and a dead aura, and you really don't want to be completely opposite your allies in a firefight anyway. I'd given half a thought to falling back into Borgin and Burke's, but early in the conversation I'd heard a faint click that made me suspect the old man had locked up specifically to avoid a battle spilling into his place of business. I wasn't sure how long it took before we had curved back around to the left, meeting up with our allies. Watcher, Dresden, Tonks managed around spells fired downrange. I thought I made out Kingsley Shacklebolt, skin so dark he was really only visible by his clothing in the spell light. That made 5 of us against what sounded like 6 of them. Even with Dolohov on their side and the extra fighters, we were probably better overall, and were slowly pushing them back, landing telling hits on some of them. But my godmother seemed off her game due to fighting on the opposite side she'd usually find herself on, and she couldn't actually use unforgivables with auras watching. The opposition had no such limitation. We found that out when two green lights at once converged from separate angles and Shacklebolt could only dodge one of them. Shack! Tonks screamed in anguish as the big aura collapsed. Before she and Moody could lose their minds, I yelled, "I've got him. Keep attacking." Both of them poured their rage at their friend's death into their assault, while I knelt down on the grimy cobblestones next to the fallen aura. I took my staff in my offhand and tried to make sure I wasn't going to eat a killing curse of my own while I worked, drawing my unicorn horn focus with my right. I didn't exactly have the depth of emotion for Kingsley as I had for my friends, but he was a good man, and I liked him. He'd been the first Order of the Phoenix member I'd met, and he'd called Dumbledore to get me out of Azkaban. I summoned up enough love to incant, Hoc est corpus. I was really hopeful when he was suffused with white light, but I didn't have time to make sure before I needed to keep moving. The Lestrange brothers were visible by the light of their own shields as they were taking fire from both Tonks and Moody and pinned down, while my godmother had managed to fight a one-on-one duel with Darlohov. I thought I could make out Crouch trying to revive the other combatants after they'd been hexed unconscious. The brothers had strong shields and were holding up against the aura assault until I made use of the focus I had to hand and yelled, "Exscorio." The exorcism charm ignored their shields and caught one of the brothers full in the chest. I couldn't actually tell them apart in the dark, but as I held onto the effect, lighting up the alley with the pulsing ray of white static that connected us, he began to wail in enforced remorse for all his misdeeds. That was enough for his brother to throw a bombarder at the cobblestones, using the explosion to cover their retreat. Darlohov was enough of a pro to realize it was over and threw down a line of black mist to cover his own escape. By the time someone had managed a wind charm to clear all the obstructions, only one enemy body remained unconscious on the ground, left by his allies. We'd later find that it was Terence Higgs, former seeker for Slytherin who'd graduated before I had. Tonks seemed prepared to give chase, but Moody cautioned, "No use, lass. Run off into the dark, and they won't be the only threats further in." "They killed Shack," she argued. "Only for a second," Kingsley groaned, sitting up. With a high-pitched shriek of excitement, I was almost knocked over by the hug Tonks gave me. "You're going to teach me those spells," she insisted. "I thought all the auras were learning them," I complained as she skipped over to check on her partner. Moody grumbled, still keeping an eye on the alley. They were hard, and most of them didn't want to. Part of the reason I went ahead and retired. But they'll make them mandatory now. Where are the rest of them anyway? We only had to wait a couple more minutes before the aura reinforcements braved the dark alley. I guess, to be fair, 6 of the on-duty staff were accounted for, and there weren't a huge number of people on the force. All that was left was the boring rest of the process. I missed dinner. My godmother got to call both the Malfoy and the Black lawyers. Cornelius Fudge made a brief appearance to badly damage his bowler hat as he crushed it nervously while getting the report, but stayed as far from Bellatrix as possible. I finally got to meet Amelia Bones, the head of the whole department, who seemed grudgingly impressed and hiding it behind her monocle. "We recovered John Dawlish," she explained to the assorted auras present, most of whom were in mourning for the 3 that had been killed. The grey-haired witch looked sour about the whole thing. "Locked in his own home cupboard for months. We're instituting new security procedures. Vigil for Proudfoot, Williamson and Fawley this weekend. Lestrange and Dresden, you're free to go." How much of that was planned? I asked my godmother as we were checked out and walking across the giant foyer of the ministry. She shrugged. How was I to know that you could just polyjuice as an aura for months with no one noticing? Roddy and Rabby should have had the sense to be laying low. If they'd wanted to know what was going on, they could have just owled me. So, everything up until the confrontation, but you didn't actually know it would be a surprise family get-together. I figured. Something like that, she shrugged. Thank Moody for me, for bringing more backup than I expected, and tell him that if he had gotten my niece killed, I would have been upset. I'm sure it will be a lovely black family Christmas, I smirked. Let me know when Borgian gets back to you. Of course, Harry, have I ever kept secrets from you? I just rolled my eyes and stepped into the flue. "Good night, ma'am." "Sleep well, Harry," she called as I whirled off to the safety of my house. I knew I wouldn't for a while yet, because Penny and Percy were going to need everything explained. At least I'd make them order my takeout for the story. I was just stepping out of the fireplace as I realized and slapped myself in the forehead in disappointment, groaning. I forgot to quote Pulp Fiction at them. Chapter 54, Holy Grail 11, Waltzing Mathilda. Chapter text child actor. The annoying thing about December was that everything was a furious run-up to Christmas. Even at Borgin and Burke's, the dark magic stocking stuffers were flying off the shelves, keeping them from spending any real time locating our missing Horcrux. Moody and I were slammed with work tracking down shrinkage in various upscale businesses. There were so many workers that thought their jewelry store owners wouldn't notice a gold bracelet wandering off as a present for the wife. And it seemed like even the Crouch/Lestrange Alliance were happily hiding in a hole somewhere drinking festive beverages and not making themselves available for further questioning. Admittedly, the fact they'd killed 3 auras meant they really needed to wait for the heat to die down. In my limited free time, my side project was preparing for the second task. I'd gotten the golden egg open shortly after leaving Dumbledore's office. It had started blaring some kind of high-pitched alarm, and I'd immediately consulted Bob about what it was. Merfolk, it turned out, spoke English, but at a magically augmented pitch that worked great for having conversations across a lake, but which was extremely irritating in the air. I wasn't surprised the headmaster didn't want to hear it in his office. This competition had a lot of very loud challenges that were annoying for someone with sensitive hearing. Once listened to with my head in the bathtub, I received a song about stealing my treasures and having an hour to get them back. Hostage challenges were once all the rage in the Triwizard Tournament, according to the histories, so I'd planned to have a talk with Dumbledore about making completely sure that Mathilda was safe. Bob at least confirmed that merfolk were not particularly beholden to the Sidhe. While there were a few water-based fairy types, the merfolk on Earth were mostly related to the deep empires of the Farmer. They did not like the Sidhe and were mostly quiescent these days, so I at least didn't have to worry about Maeve commanding an army of watery foes to kill me and Mathilda. But I did have to worry about facing an ice-based fairy queen in the freezing cold lake in February. Thus, part of my time was spent practicing swimming. I knew how to swim. The city pool is a cheap way to distract a bunch of orphans for a few hours every day of the summer, after all. But Justin Dumorn hadn't been much for entertainment activities, so we never spent any time at the lake. Thus, time spent renewing my skills in the water. I also had some longer-term plans to make sure everyone would see if I got attacked by Maeve. But I needed to confirm Dumbledore didn't already have something in mind before doing a lot of enchanting. I thought I'd have the weekend of the 9th to get some projects done, before I got a letter from Mathilda finally outlining my penance for suggesting that the crow would be appropriate for her baby brothers. It turned out another fantasy movie that was almost certainly appropriate for preteens was coming to theaters. Her uncle had tickets, and I was going to help chaperone. Her dad and stepmom needed the date night, so we were responsible for protecting the boys and incidentally noting any dangers to the secrecy of the wizarding world in the latest Macaulay Culkin film. I was going to see the Pagemaster. "This theater isn't owned by a Death Eater, right?" I asked Abraham Grimblehawk as we were shepherding Edgar and Robert into the Cardiff-area cinema. The 2 young boys, 2 years apart, and Edgar just about old enough for Hogwarts, still reminded me a lot of the Creevy brothers. So far, they'd been nothing but the kind of boisterous that made me expect Gryffindor. I knew Mathilda was torn between being happy she was graduating before her baby brother became a hurricane in the house common room and sad to miss it. The old man shook his head, enormous white mutton chops fluttering slightly with emotion. Number easier with mass releases. We got to pick our place. No one was informed of the specifics. For a pureblood that had to be pushing 100, my girlfriend's great-uncle didn't do too badly at dressing for Muggle London. Like most older wizards, it helped that he could be out of fashion by a couple of decades, and nobody would notice. And little boys' fashion hadn't changed much for decades, especially bundled up for December. I nodded, then took charge of the two youngsters while Abraham went to the concession stand. "Are you gonna marry Thilda?" the younger brother Robert asked, all business once left alone with me. He had slightly darker brown hair than his brothers and a remaining babyish roundness to his face. Also, the utter lack of boundaries common to 8-year-olds. "Maybe. Not any time soon," I assured him. "We want to be older before we make those kinds of decisions." "But you're so old already. Mum married Dad right out of school," the boy's logic progressed. "What about you?" I asked Edgar. "Deep opinions on your sister's marital status." He considered, then said, "Well, I don't think Dad actually cares, but it's not like Eddie or Sel are going to get married any time soon. Probably get the better wedding if Thilda goes first." "Great. I'm getting financially lobbied by preteens," I told him. "I don't know if I see us doing a big, fancy wedding, regardless." "Because everyone's scared of you?" the boy asked with surprising insight. "Well, let's just say I'm not exactly cut out for the society pages." Robert patted my leg in consolation. "It's okay. We know you're a good guy." I was still thinking about that as Abraham returned with the popcorn and drinks, and we made our way into the theater. The boys took a seat in the aisle ahead of us and were immediately engrossed in the trailers, and I quietly asked their uncle, "So the kids already know people are scared of me? How bad are the rumors at the ministry?" "Bar gossip," he harumphed, but then added, "It's a mixed bag. You have no lack of friends to speak for you, but with the Durmstrang connection and your godmother and rumors of the Doom, it's good John Dawlish is on leave to recover. Still not my biggest fan, huh? I guess a little gratitude is out of the question. Guy probably thinks I conspired to get him imprisoned and impersonated." I thought about it for a second and said, "But it's not just the ministry. If the boys know about it, that means Thilda's parents are talking about it at home. I'm sure Nick and Brid were just talking about the news. If they were worried, they'd say something. Someone else will become notorious soon enough. They always do," he consoled me. The movie started before I could grill him further. It probably could have been worse. At least it was short. And hey, Christopher Lloyd was in it, and a bunch of actors from Star Trek did voices. I wasn't really sure about the star power of the lead, though. To be fair, I've been a little busy the last few years and missed all of the Home Alone craze. "Well, I think we can mark that as safe," Abraham said, sarcastically, as the movie ended. He had dozed off through most of it. "Confirmed. No statute of secrecy violations detected," I agreed. I was curious what the Grimblehawks would actually do if they saw a big-budget fantasy movie and thought it was too accurate. Write a sternly worded letter to the American ministry to try to shutter a globally released film. I was pretty sure the whole thing was really just a grift to let them see movies on the ministry's bank account. As we were exiting the theater with the throng, we suddenly had 3 young boys with us, rather than the expected 2. "Harry, I knew it was you." Our new addition barked at me in his heavy Welsh accent. "Hey, Archie," I told the small, blond boy. "Going to see a movie." He nodded as his parents walked up. His well-dressed father said, "Mr. Dresden, it's a pleasant surprise to see you. You're easy to pick out of a crowd." "Especially if they're children," I confirmed, towering over most of the audience that was exiting with us. "Your brothers?" he asked, looking at Edgar and Robert. "My girlfriends," I confirmed. "Well, good to see you. And thanks again for finding Archie." His mother cut the somewhat awkward interaction short. "Enjoy your movie," I told them as we started moving again. "Friends of yours?" Abraham asked, nearly as confused as I was about the happenstance run-in. "You remember the search you told Moody about near the Dragon Preserve?" I reminded him of the events of earlier in the summer. "Ah, yes, that was the missing boy," I explained. "Yeah, he was out with scouts or something and wandered away from the group. Got so turned around he wandered straight through the aversion wards and into the preserve. Since that forest is unplottable, the local police couldn't manage to find him. Their search grid didn't even get close enough to be turned around by the wards. Happens once every few years, sadly, and you tracked him down. It was easy enough, though we had to pretend we weren't using tracking charms. Fortunately, he'd heard the dragons roaring in the distance and just bunkered down. Didn't get close enough to see anything or risk getting eaten. Kid had a rough couple of days, but came out of it okay, and that got us on the kid-finding Rolodex. We've gotten a few more good cases out of it. Good work. Ignore the ministry gossip. Parents walk up to thank you in public. That's worth more than opinion. That moment of congratulation over the old man suggested, "Dinner around here." Fill the boys up with hamburgers before dropping off with their parents, you mean? I grinned, happy about the praise and the suggestion. Burger King. Both boys chorused, visions of kids' meals dancing in their heads. Waltzing Mathilda, the rumor was that originally Dumbledore had grand plans to set the Yule Ball on Christmas Day. All the students would stay at the school over the holiday break. Families wouldn't get to see their kids at Christmas. And all even though Yule technically started on the solstice, not the Christian holiday. Fortunately, he was talked out of that idea by the simple worry that the she might break the flu system again on the 21st, so the adult guests might be excluded. Theoretically, the Winter Court had promised to stop their yearly veil-tearing hijinks, but we wouldn't know for sure until the 22nd. Out of an abundance of caution and common sense, the party had been rescheduled to the Monday before, with the plan to send the kids home on the 20th and back on the day after New Year's. Moody had compensated for all the weird days I was unavailable by starting to mix in weekends to our work schedule, and thus I was also super happy to see this Triwizard nonsense over with so I could work Monday to Friday again. I had managed to repair my tuxedo that I'd been mauled in on the previous New Year's. Well, I tried a few repair charms and then broken down and taken it to Madame Malkin, the Diagon Alley tailor, who had all the time in the world after school was in session to fix it while clucking at me about what terrible things I'd done to such a nice outfit. It was still far less expensive than getting a new one. I'd mostly even stopped growing at my advanced age, so it still fit. Penny said I looked sharp, and Percy couldn't help but agree. They were both kind of sad they didn't get to attend the Yule Ball. Rather than take liberties with the headmaster's fireplace, I flew into Hogsmeade and killed a bit of time at the Three Broomsticks. Quite a few of the other older students also had dates from outside the school, so it was quite the gathering of fancy-dressed post-teens crowding around the inn. Harry, I was greeted by Bill Weasley, who had affected an Egyptian-style suit. It was hard to get a read on whether he was trying for a whole Lawrence of Arabia deal or just liked the culture where he'd been working the last few years. Nonetheless, he looked pretty striking. "What's up, man?" I asked. "I assume Fleur talked you into taking her," he nodded. "I'm still worried she's a little young and Mum's going to lose her mind when she finds out. Because she's a Vila," he shook his head, "because she's French." "Well, send Marley to me if it's an issue since I can talk Fleur up," I assured him. "You could certainly do much worse, native English or not. I mean, not to rush you or anything, but if you could get Fleur to confirm she's interested in having kids young, your mom would be thrilled. Percy and Penny aren't in any hurry." "Yeah, I don't think I'm going to bring up having kids on our first date, but I'll keep that in mind," he grinned. There was a general move toward the door, as people realized it was about time, so he said, "Shall we?" Someone, probably my grandmother, had thought ahead to how many dates would be coming in from Hogsmeade, and had a few Thistral-drawn carriages brought out to take us up to the school. The bat-winged spectral horses really gave the whole thing a bit more of a Dracula vibe when we were all dressed up than when it was just the normal ride up to the school. In addition to Bill, I wound up riding with Jason Denbright and Rose Wax, two Gryffindors who'd also graduated recently and had dates at the school. It was fun to take a few minutes to catch up with them, even though we hadn't been particularly close. The smallness of the core of British wizarding society meant that you'd constantly be bumping into people with whom you'd been slightly friendly in school and trying to make small talk. We strolled out of the carriages and up to the main door into the school, where the entry hall was already milling with students who shied away from the blast of cold air as we entered. You could basically tell which houses people were waiting for based on whether they were crowded around the stairs up to the towers or the ones down to the dungeons. Given that most kids were dating within their houses and could just meet and walk in together, the few dozen people standing around, mostly boys, represented a wonderful cross-house interaction. Well, also most of the boys from the other schools were in the area. I found myself standing next to Victor Crumb as we waited, and I asked, "Who'd you wind up asking?" "Katie Bell. Thank you for the introduction," he smiled. "I look forward to playing against her if her team makes the finals." "Oh, right, Quidditch is still happening. How's that going?" I made conversation while waiting. My team beat the Beauxbatons team we played, of course, but their other team beat ours. The semifinals will be after the second task. Once my team van, it will be us against Gryffindor or Slytherin in the final. It sounded like bravado, but he probably wasn't wrong that his team didn't have much to fear from the semi-finals. The Gryffindor versus Slytherin match is going to be one to watch, I assured him. We're pushing a Romeo and Juliet thing between their seekers. Keep an eye out tonight to see if Draco asks Ginny to dance. He clearly recognized the names of his potential rival seekers and seemed appropriately amused by the idea. I shall avoid teaching either the Vronsky feint, then, lest it cause hard feelings. Is that the one where you try to run the other seeker into the dirt? He nodded, and I had a moment of worry that I was picking up Quidditch terminology despite myself. Yeah, that wouldn't be good to do to your paramour, but Ginny's almost done worse to Draco in their previous matches. I passed the rest of the time telling him about the fake-out she used to catch the snitch in their first game and saving his life from Dementors in their second. The girls finally started to show up in the parade of various people coming down from the towers, and I immediately picked out Mathilda in the crowd. She looked very nice, though I'd seen her dolled up for balls on multiple occasions. It was fun to watch various guys who'd never seen their girlfriend have the opportunity to really get dressed up. The jaw-dropping almost came with a sound effect. "You look nice," I told her, not having let my eyes wander to take in the crowd scene for too long. "You too." "Fixed the dress robes from last year, huh?" I shrugged. All my new tux money went into Ron's outfit. How's he doing? Finally fully aware Hermione's a girl, I think, she grinned. Colin got a picture of his face. My grandmother was distracted from her stage managing of the champions as we walked up by a smile threatening to break her stoic Scottish mien as she saw me and Mathilda together. "You both look presentable," she hedged, before ushering us into the back of the line with Maeve and her date up front. She'd grabbed Damien Perris, the Slytherin prefect who'd graduated the previous year. Bill and Fleur were our buffer. "I hope you're all prepared to open the dance after we eat. Lead your partner and follow me." Without looking back, she led us into the Great Hall ahead of the rest of the crowd. They'd done a good job of turning the Great Hall into a winter wonderland, which I imagined involved a ton of transfiguration magic, while classes had been cancelled for the day. We were led up to the head table, which had been lengthened to make room for the champions, our dates, and the judges. Somehow, they'd managed to organize it so Bagman and Umbridge were stranded at the end next to Maeve, while I got to sit between Bill and Mathilda right down from my grandmother. That they were experimenting with ordering by menu was probably working the elves ragged below in the kitchen. After the meal, they magically shoved the tables against the wall to create a space for dancing. I could tell they'd also increased the space expansion charms a bit in the room, since just excluding the lower ears didn't free up a bunch of extra square footage. We were, as warned, urged to start the dance to every wizard's favorite chamber music. Mathilda and I were obviously used to ballroom dancing, and I wasn't too surprised that Bill knew what he was doing while leading Fleur, and Maeve's date didn't put on too bad of a showing. After the first song, the rest of the crowd joined in, though I could still tell there were a bunch of kids around the edges who weren't interested. It was fun, at least for the first couple of numbers. Then my luck ran out, and Maeve was suddenly way too close and asking, "Can I cut in for a song?" What if I said no? Mathilda challenged. "I don't intend to harm him," she offered, "and he might gain useful information from the discussion." "Fine, but I'm watching," my girlfriend warned as she stepped out to let Maeve step in. I clearly didn't get a vote in this exchange. As with the previous year's ball, Maeve had gone with a dress that was just inside the lines of what would get her kicked out for indecency, and I tried to keep my hands off any of the skin she was showing. It was still like waltzing with a snowman. One that was full of razor blades. She was all sharp angles, and I wasn't sure how her date hadn't noticed that she wasn't just very skinny, she was unnaturally thin. Normal humans needed more space inside their torsos for organs. But she was, to give her credit, a very good dancer. "All right, it's your dime. What do you want?" I cut to the chase a few steps into the number. "I can't just crave a dance with you, having seen that you actually know what you're doing," she teased. What if I was to tell you that Ludo Bagman no longer wants to admit that he was trying to help me win the tournament? I thought about it, then said, "Well, first I'd note that you phrased that as a question, neatly getting around the fact that you can't lie. Second, if true, you mean tonight, at dinner." I guess that's what he was talking to you about at the first task. Yes. I inferred that he'd wagered on me as an underdog, hoping to win big. And yes, as a declarative statement, he didn't bring up anything similar at dinner. Could just be he didn't want to say anything in front of Umbridge. I mused. And why are you even telling me all of this? I'm saying it was almost like he's a different person, which I understand is a problem for you. As much as I might not care if you die, Harry Dresden, I don't idly risk the lives of my allies like your godmother. I glanced at where Bagman was still sitting at the end of the high table, watching the dancing. Well, I think you're just trying to manipulate me somehow, but I'll take the warning as given. At the very least, he's wearing dress robes and not his old Quidditch jersey, so that's one point toward it being Crouch under Polyjuice. You sure you don't just want him back so he can keep cheating for you? Please. I don't need a washed-up broom jockey to help me win this competition. All right, well, I appreciate the information, I told her, ending the dance and looking for where Bagman had gotten to in the crowd. Before I could find the possibly polyjuiced ministry official, I was intercepted by a girl in a large round pair of glasses with reddish hair. It took me a minute in her dress and makeup, but I recognized Elora Dunn, a girl in Mathilda's year that I wasn't sure I'd ever talked to. She wasn't in Newt Defense, so I didn't even know what house she was in. "Can I have a dance, Harry?" she asked. She was a quiet girl, and I was worried she'd been carrying a torch for me all this time and finally worked up the courage to ask for a dance. I tried to let her down gently, sorry, Elora, but I just got some information I need to follow up on. Undeterred, she stepped up close to me so I'd almost have to take her into my arms and explained, "You see, Bellatrix Lestrange killed my mother in the war. I want her to know what that's like." Too late I noticed the steak knife she was concealing in her hand and the unfocused, mind-controlled look in her eyes behind her glasses. As the knife went in under my ribs, all I could think was that I'd just gotten my tux repaired. Hospital cornered, fortunately for my vital organs. The imperious curse doesn't give witches who have never wielded a melee weapon in their lives any particular skill at stabbing. Unfortunately for my continued dancing, a deep stab wound to the abdomen is still incredibly dangerous even if it misses anything vital. Mathilda, who'd been 10 feet away and wondering why I was talking to Elora, had stunned the girl and applied basic first aid moments after the attack. But even Madame Pomfrey couldn't heal a sucking chest wound instantly, even one limited by poor knife skills, and the school's fortune wards trying to keep me alive. Did they catch Bagman? I asked when I regained consciousness in the school infirmary. Mathilda was sitting by the bed, still in her party dress. I'd managed to tell her what I thought had happened before passing out. My chest still hurt, but had clearly been magically healed compared to how bad it felt getting stabbed. "He was already long gone," she explained. "We hit Elora with the Liberatus. She's really sorry. Says she doesn't actually blame you for her mum." But it was just enough for the Imperious to convince her to stab me, I agreed. I'd worked that out pretty quickly. Girls I'd never talked to before outside of teaching them in class rarely attempted to assassinate me in the middle of a school dance. I mean, I often annoyed people enough to want to kill me, but not that much, and usually bad people, and mostly on purpose. "McGonagall was here," she added, "but had to go back to the dance once you were okay. She says she'll be around later." How long was I out? I checked. And did I ruin the party? About an hour, and I think they tried to keep it limping along, but the auras had questions. At least we got in a couple dances. I winced, not from the pain, but from the ruined date. "Want to go to the Malfoy ball to make up for this one? If you're healed in 2 weeks," she allowed. "Don't say you're sorry," she warned me, heading off my apology. "You're not responsible. The ministry should have been checking people." "Yeah, I'm sorry about that," Tonk's voice said, as she overheard that last, entering the infirmary. "Watch her," she added belatedly. "They started putting in mandatory periods for auras where they monitored us to make sure we couldn't be drinking polyjuice potion, but I guess they didn't think about whether anyone besides auras could be replaced." I joked. "I'm sure someone would get fired if it wasn't just me that got hurt." Tonks rolled her eyes. "You do seem to attract your share of violence." In the middle of a school dance this time. I hadn't been attacked by someone who was mind-controlled yet this year. I was overdue. Mathilda corrected. "Are we counting possession as mind control? If not last year either." "Fair," I admitted, doing the mental math myself. I may have been attacked by possessed people more often than mind-controlled people. Can we just cut all of that out? Tonks complained. You know this report is going to be more complicated to write than the fight in Nocturne. At least the young girl was old enough to consent to Veritasrum to clear herself. What I want to know is why they took the swing at you. I guessed. Might have realized Maeve was ratting him out, and he wouldn't have time to play the long con this time. That's why the dance with her. She wanted to warn me he wasn't acting like himself at dinner. Still don't believe her that she, damn it, I can't even tell you the fake motives she gave me. While I was trying to figure a way around the gesh that kept me from sharing Maeve's secrets, I thought about the situation further and asked, did he leave school before Dunn attacked, or did the attack give him a big distraction to do something else? Well, crap, Tonks realized I was right. I'll be back. Don't check yourself out and go home early. With that, she hurried out. Moody training is paying off, Mathilda nodded. Constant vigilance, I agreed. It's not paranoia if there really is a conspiracy of dark wizards. Tonks leaving seemed to be the signal for my visitors to enter. Hermione's crew of fourth years came in, along with Ginny Weasley and Hannah Abbott. Seamus and Ginny were, as expected, not really coupled up, despite their friend date. Conversely, Hannah was on Neville's arm, and they looked very comfortable like that, so I figured congrats were in order for a successful first date. Ron and Hermione were studiously keeping at arm's length and seemed tense about the whole thing. I'm fine, guys. You should get back to the party. Hermione waved it off and said, we were worried about you, and the Weird Sisters aren't very good. I had known the wizarding-only rock band was playing after the formal dances and had been curious about the quality. Hannah nodded. I think they only play a few times a year. I swear I've seen a couple of them working retail out in London. That made sense. It wasn't like the British wizarding world had enough social gatherings that a band could support themselves. I doubted play on the magical radio was worth a lot of royalties, especially given the local inattention to copyright. Just wanted to make sure you were okay, mate, Ron added, looking awkward about whether they should hang around or head out. You should go take a walk, Mathilda told them. They set up a garden out near the greenhouses, lots of dark corners. Why would we want to go walk in the dark? Ron asked. Hannah and Neville had already nodded, waved, and headed out. I looked at Hermione, rolling her eyes, and suggested, Ron, do you like Hermione's dress? He nodded, furtively looking away. Do you think she looks pretty? I continued. The girl had worked very hard to tame her hair and was wearing makeup, probably for the first time I'd ever seen. Ron looked a little bit more toward her, bashfully, and nodded. You do look really pretty tonight, Myone, but you always look pretty. Good addition, Mathilda took over. You too, go snog. Seeing that Hermione wasn't going to shoot down the idea, Ron grinned and said, okay, feel better, Harry, bye, and they took off hand in hand. Honestly, boys, Ginny said, once they were out of the room. She and Seamus were still hanging out together on their friend's date. Draco chose that moment to poke his head in, and Seamus noted, good Timon. Glad ye're okay, Harry. I'm going to go see if anyone's still dancing. Nonplussed at being breezed past by the Irish boy, Draco drawled, figured it might be a party in here but just wanted to check in. He had come on his own and seemed a little surprised that it was down to just the four of us. Doing okay, I assured him, but I don't recommend getting stabbed. I'll take that off the list then, he replied. See, you ditched Pansy, Mathilda observed. She's not exactly on your get-well-soon supporters list, he shrugged. Millie might check in later. Good, good. Thanks for coming, man, I told him. You should walk Ginny back to her dorm just in case there are more Imperius students wandering around with knives. Both of them rolled their eyes at our obvious matchmaking, and he said, fine, see you at the New Year's ball. Make sure my invite has a +1, I asked. I'll make sure Thilda gets her own, he assured me. Invite Fleur Delacour as well, so none of the champions are left out. He turned toward Ginny. Think your mother will let you come if your oldest brother is there to chaperone. I can be selective about what I tell her, she shrugged, nonchalant, but I thought I saw her eyes light up. Then see you both in a couple weeks, I assured them. Night. As they exited, we gave it a minute to see if any more well-wishers were lurking outside. Finally, Mathilda suggested, I need to tell Penny and Alexis. This night worked out, matchmaking-wise at least. I'll try to get injured tactically more often then, I joked. You'll see Penny tomorrow at least. You excited? Yeah, it'll be really good to get back to the house, and to ride back on the train with you tomorrow. I winced. Right. No way Pomfrey's going to let me flew home with a chest wound, huh? Mister is going to be really mad when he goes from having the whole bed tonight to being totally displaced tomorrow. I bet he's gotten so big. She remembered the cat. I'm going to just put my whole face in his tummy. That seemed dangerous to me, but I just said, "You're the magical creatures expert." I started planning to talk Madame Pomfrey into giving me a bottle of Dittany salve for when her face got clawed up by the massive house cat. The smile about getting to go back home faded slightly, and in a rare moment of seriousness, Mathilda asked something she'd clearly been thinking about. Is this just how it is? You were 10 feet from me. I couldn't stop you from getting stabbed. And you're out there without me, in the tournament without me. Do I just have to wait for one of them to get lucky? I shrugged, making my patched-up chest wound hurt. Talk to Remus, maybe, I suggested. I don't know how he feels about dating an aura. I might feel the same way about it when you're off dealing with dangerous creatures. I know I worry enough that someone might come after you because of me. I took a breath and admitted, I don't think I would want to stop, even if I somehow could avoid them coming after me. I think I'm actually helping people, and the more fights we win against the Death Eaters, the safer other people are. Yeah, she sighed. And I don't want you to. I love that you're helping people. I'm just mad I can't really do anything, at least until I graduate. He wiped a bit of moisture from the corner of her eye and asked, Can you at least try not to get into any mortal danger until the second task? I'll try, I insisted. But that's nearly 2 months. Someone will probably try to kill me at the Malfoy ball in 2 weeks. Fine. Then we better make the most of the holiday break then. No running off with Moody to get cursed. Deal, I agreed. And I'll tell him to come fight with you about it if he suggests we do something overly dangerous. Deal, she smiled. We caught up a little more, quietly talking, for about 10 minutes before Tonks tripped and nearly face-planted into the wall in a hurry to run back into the infirmary. You were right, she told me. He raided the supply closets in the potions classroom and the runes workshop. Both of them were a wreck. Belby and Babbling are trying to sort out what he took. I'm going to guess at the very least more polyjuice supplies, I said. And I don't love that he's planning to enchant something. She nodded and said, Well, I'm supposed to be keeping an eye on you tonight in case he's lurking in the castle. Go talk to the Weasley twins, I told her. They could use their magic map to make sure nobody was left on campus who shouldn't be. I mean, I already got assigned, she disagreed. And I was wondering if, while I'm here, you two could help me learn your soulfire spells. Mathilda grinned, and I just waved her on. I needed her help to show the wand movements anyway, even if I wasn't immobilized. But I wondered if Dumbledore would pay me my substitute teacher's fee for the next couple of hours. After all, I was teaching in Hogwarts. Chapter 55, Holy Grail 12, Magic Dance. Chapter text House Party. My Christmases had slowly ramped up over the last few years. In the orphanage, they tried, but there were only so many resources for Christmas cheer. Justin Dumorn barely did anything for the holiday, which might have been an early clue that his heart wasn't really in the whole adoption thing. At Hogwarts, I'd slowly moved from small exchanges of presents after attempting to escape the country to big gift exchanges and Boxing Day lunch with my girlfriend's parents. But none of that prepared me for my first Christmas in my own house with two girls that were really into decorating. Percy had made an initial argument that the house was under Fidelius, so nobody would even see the decorations. That kind of logic had crashed, burned, and nearly wound up with him getting to sleep on the couch. This was our first year able to control our own living space, and Mathilda and Penny were going to make sure every single inch of it was festive. It was better to just go with the flow. I was slightly fortunate in that my still healing stab wound gave me ample excuse to not do any strenuous decorating. But it didn't take long for them to realize that I could at least maintain levitation charms. Given how much time Penny and Percy were at work, and with Mathilda back in school, I suspected it would be my responsibility to take all of it down after the holidays. But in the frenzy of the couple of days between Mathilda coming home and Christmas, we got the place looking pretty nice. I had no idea where all the decorations had come from. Maybe most of them were conjured and would disappear on their own. Since the Winter Court had stuck to their terms, we were pleasantly surprised that the flu networks hadn't been broken again on the solstice. So the Furious House decorating was only the first part of Christmas. and we were all planning an intricate schedule of visits. Unlike Percy and Penny, I at least didn't have my own family commitments to figure out for Christmas morning. There had been a very delicate negotiation of when they'd visit the Clearwaters up in Manchester, and when they'd be at the Borough with the Weasleys. I was easy, and could just go to the Grimblehawk estate in Wales for the morning. But while Christmas morning was easy, it turned out that I'd accumulated quite the number of people that wanted a visit from me no later than the end of Boxing Day. Marley Weasley had a rolling open house for Order of the Phoenix visitors. I needed to figure out when my grandmother would be visiting for that and coordinate. I might need to go with Mathilda when her mom got her turn to see her daughters for Christmas. The Grangers wanted a visit that wasn't me collapsing on their doorstep after being mauled by a possessed animagus, likely to pump me for information about Hermione and Ron. To top all of that off, Draco was having a black family gathering at Grimmauld Place that I was strongly implied to be required for. That last one made me worry that I might not even make it to New Year's before getting attacked. At least I might be able to defend myself. By Christmas Day, my chest still hurt a bit, but I was safe for flu travel. Magical healing was impressive, though the potions regimen that Madame Pomfrey had me on was pretty extensive and bad tasting. So bright and early, we stepped out of the fire into the house Mathilda had mostly grown up in. Unlike the traditional Grimblehawk Manor house, the house they'd inherited from her stepmother's family was more of a super-classy farmhouse. The whitewashed brick building looked out on the forests that contained the main preserve of Welsh green dragons. Inside, it was done in old, comfortable woods, and was both evidence of where Mathilda got her decorating spirit from, and also that it was home to two young boys. Both Christmas decorations and discarded toys were everywhere. The gathering was only slightly anxiety-inducing, since I'd already met everyone except Mathilda's middle sister, Giselle, who was able to get away from her veterinarian job for long enough to open presents. I'd been worried that they were worried Mathilda was dating a dark wizard, but either the boys had heard those rumors from someone else or Abraham had talked to them. Honestly, I caught more flack from gifting the boys the Crow action figures than from anything that had been in the papers. My lack of free time and limited access to the Hogwarts Runes workshop meant that I got just about everyone's store-bought presents rather than enchanted items for once. Mathilda was the exception. I'd worked hard to make a delicate lady's version of my own shield bracelet. It wasn't solid gold or anything, but I thought it looked nice enough, and she seemed to agree. Other than hopefully giving her more protection if she could master using a focus for shields instead of her wand, it had a second feature. I'd coupled ideas from Filch's familiar bond bracelet and the Protean charmed rings to link her bracelet to mine. We should be able to get a rough sense of one another's direction and distance at all times, and the sensation should become stronger when the bracelets were in use. I was hoping that it would make her feel better knowing all the times I wasn't needing to put up a shield, rather than making her get nervous when I had to. If she was taken hostage for the second task and they let her keep it on, it should also make it a lot easier to find her. Her oldest sister, Edith, said, 2 years of highly enchanted magical jewelry, huh? The whole family, even the boys, gave me a searching look, and then it wasn't brought up again. At the very least, everyone involved seemed happy that I was taking pains to protect Mathilda, rather than just putting her in danger. After that somewhat tense morning session, the rest of the day was easier. The inside of the Borough was packed all afternoon, with the outdoors dripping with chilly rain, but Molly kept the snacks coming, and it was enjoyable rather than cramped. And when it finally did get a little crowded, we took the opportunity to grab Percy and Penny and visit the Grangers. Percy and I distracted Hermione while her parents grilled Mathilda and Penny on their daughter's love life. They must have approved, because she was allowed to apparate back with us to the Borough for dinner. Next day, still stuffed from Marley's extravagant feast, we had a brief stopover to see Mathilda's mother before it was time to brave the Black family lunch festivities. We ran into the Tonks family with Remus in the park as we apparated in. Guess I wasn't the only one to get a +1, I said. I told Draco I wasn't coming if Remus wasn't invited, Dora said. All allies we can get, Andromeda said, visibly stiffening her posture like putting on a suit of armor. Shall we? Showing off that she had decided not to consider herself a guest, Andromeda simply opened the door for us and led us into the house. Creature still appeared out of the dining room in an instant and gave a nod. Good. Everyone is here and on time. Please come into the sitting room. As we followed the long-eared elf, I noted that the place possibly looked even better than it had when we'd finished removing the threats and fixing the wards a few months earlier. I assumed it was a combination of Creature's renewed strength now that his gesh to destroy the Horcrux had been discharged, and the repaired magic flow in the house. The ground floor den had all the furniture fully cleaned and restored, and saw the Malfoys and my godmother lounging. The juxtaposition of the very bland and preppy Malfoy trio, with a woman that was one pair of welding goggles away from kitted out for a techno-industrial rave, was amusing. Lucius quickly controlled a sneer when he saw that the party included Ted Tonks and Remus Lupin. Draco stood and said, "Excellent. Thank you all for coming. I thought, since the manor has been restored, it would be good to have a family gathering. I'm only sad that the blacks have dwindled so low. Still time for you to get the numbers back up." I couldn't help but tell him. I did not suggest that the Weasleys were known for their numerous offspring because I am a gentleman. Draco still paled slightly at the implication, but Andromeda added, "Well, if Nymphadora and Remus could stop working for 5 minutes, perhaps my line could do its part as well." "Mum," Dora whined, hair turning an embarrassed green. Bellatrix cackled, and we could always adopt Harry and Mathilda's babies as a fallback. It was my turn to go pale, though Mathilda seemed pleased that my godmother had actually learned her name. Grand tradition of such things among the court, of course. "We shan't let the black name die out, though the motto may take some rephrasing." Dora scoffed. "Make it about pure intentions rather than pure blood, and I'll undersign." Clearly sensing her husband might say something clever but snide, Narcissa smiled. "Here, here. Why don't we go eat? Creature has been working all morning, and it smells marvelous." The space-expanded dining room was plenty large enough for 10, and the Malfoy matriarch was correct that Creature had outdone himself. The food was not up to Marley Weasley's standard, and was much more formal and high class, but it was very good. The Black Sisters carried the conversation, managing to keep to safe topics. Sadly, the safest topics were my latest shenanigans. Not a lot of chance to have an argument about dark magic and racism when you're describing how I almost got incinerated. And then, stabbed at the Yule Ball I hear. My godmother moved the topic on. "Our old buddy Barty Imperiused a girl," I confirmed. "I think he panicked, since Maeve was onto him. Still not sure why she warned me." Bellatrix shrugged. "We've had a discussion, Maeve and I, particularly given your importance to the undertaking. Even she understands that it would not be ideal for you to die in the near future." Dora, not caring about the politics, latched onto that admission to ask Draco, "So is the House of Black fully involved in this weird conspiracy with the fairies?" Because that could be a deal-breaker. They're enemies of the state, you know. Mathilda gave her a little low five under the table. Draco sighed and looked at his father and aunt. "The House of Black is neutral on the subject of the Fae. If some members of this family have plots in motion to help or hinder the she courts, that's their personal business." "Perfectly fair. Such a good little head of house you're going to be, Draco," Bellatrix sing-songed at him. Amused, she turned back to me and said, "Anyway, what I was getting at is that's two. Just survive one more assassination attempt from Barty, and the rule of 3 should kick in." "Wait, I thought that only applied for attacks by the she," I said. "Otherwise I'd be doing much better against your old friends." "Normally, you're right," she admitted. "But since Barty has made it clear that he's targeting you to interfere with my plans, I believe he'll find himself affected by the rule as well." Mathilda smirked and suggested, "Is that open-ended? Somebody tries to kill Harry. He yells, 'I'm essential to a she plot,' and now they're on the clock." That actually shut my godmother up as she considered it. I heard a quiet groan from down the table and looked over to Remus, who'd been very quiet the whole meal. But I was pretty sure the look on his face was meant to say, "This is the weirdest party I've ever been to, and I'm a werewolf. Magic dance, oh, it's Chang and Diggory." Mathilda observed as we entered the Malfoy ballroom for the New Year's party. "He invited the other Seekers. Very clever of Draco." "Yeah, I see Victor," I agreed, then gestured at a trio of other teens. "Guess those 3 are the extra players from the Durmstrang and Beauxbaton's teams. Nobody can complain that Ginny's here now." Glad that kid is on our side, she grinned. He's gotten too smart to be an enemy. And we have enough of those, I said, glancing at where Maeve was holding court with some of the younger guests, and then tracking Cantankerous Knot and the other Death Eaters that were still able to go out in public to where they were lurking in another part of the large room. No picking fights. Let's dance. Yes, ma'am, I agreed, immediately making for the dance floor. The night went better than the Yule Ball had. We got a bunch of dancing in. It was fun to watch Fleur and Bill be totally wrapped up with one another. Cedric and Cho made a cute couple. Draco managed to take Ginny out on the dance floor a couple of times. Nobody stabbed me. I realize there are a lot of people I don't know, Mathilda eventually pointed out. Not the same as last year. Weirdly pretty. Point a couple out, I asked. She managed to do so subtly over the next minute as we danced by. They were all, as she'd suggested, of indeterminate age and extreme beauty. She asked. I considered. Probably so. More than I thought they had in Britain. Wonder what's going on. It took another hour until it became apparent. When the fashionably late guests showed up close to 10, all heads turned. On the arm of a large man who looked completely out of place in formal wear was a woman that appeared like she could live her entire life in an evening dress and not look out of place. Or in anything, really. If the probably she in the room were beautiful, and Maeve was the most stunning of them, this woman made the rest look like pale shadows. And then the moment was over, and she was just an extraordinarily attractive woman of indeterminate age. I saw several wizards that weren't used to she glamour shaking their heads and looking away, confused by why the guest had so fascinated them. Released from the compulsion to gaze in worship, I was able to catalogue the more precise details. She was tall, especially in her heels, probably topping 6 feet. Especially contrasted against her charcoal dress and jewelry of blue gems, I'd almost think she was an albino, with hair the color of snow and skin that was somehow paler, save for her luminous green eyes. Her lips were the color of frozen mulberries. I didn't actually even know what a mulberry was. That comparison popped into my brain unbidden. I intensely disliked she-magic. I don't like her, Mathilda confided. Maybe some upper-level luminary in the Winter Court. I considered. It didn't take long to overhear one of the nearby dancing couples that was faster on the gossip correct my assumption. That's Madame Somerset, Maeve's birth mother. Of course, looking over, I realized it was Minister Fudge. His wife huffed out. Well, I can certainly see why Abraxas took her as a mistress. I suppose you must greet her, but keep your eyes to her face, Cornelius. Looked like the Minister for Magic and his wife were still out of the loop that Maeve was only pretending to be Lucius' half-sister. It's Maeve's mother, I told Mathilda, whose hearing wasn't as good as mine. You mean? Yeah, I confirmed. If Maeve was the princess of the Winter Court, that meant there had to be a queen. Let's dance this way, Mathilda suggested, putting as much distance as possible between us and the Queen of Air and Darkness. We made it about 2 more dances before my luck ran out. Ah. My daughter's fellow champion. Allow me a dance, Harry Dresden. Her voice was as perfect as the rest of her, but left no question this was not a request. Slate, see that his paramour comes to no harm while I monopolize her date. The big man grunted an assent and offered a hand to Mathilda. She shot me a look before taking it which onlookers would probably interpret as jealousy, but which I knew was an order to not die. If dancing with Maeve had been like waltzing with a glacier, her mother was entirely surprising. While still as unyielding as marble, she was slightly warm. But I realized it was the warmth of an igloo, ice so solid that it was able to reflect my own heat back to me. Or perhaps I was simply interpreting the enormous well of power in my grasp as heat, for lack of a better way of translating it to my senses. I tried very hard not to get handsy. Nervously, I broke the ice with the first thing that came to mind. You, remind me of the babe. What babe? The Queen of the Winter Court asked calmly. I really thought about seeing if I could get away with the whole bit from Labyrinth, but settled on just answering, Maeve. I can see the resemblance. I took a breath and then pressed on. She told me a few months ago you were still trapped behind the veil. I'm surprised it didn't crack this year, with your visit. It was a dangerous gambit. But I was suddenly curious whether Maeve had lied to me, and how someone this powerful had been around for the last year or more without someone noticing. Since I don't intend to stay for long, The damage was significantly less than establishing a residency, she offered. I didn't know if it should be more upsetting than being lied to that the veil was already damaged enough that the she could come here on vacation as long as they weren't planning to stay long. Unlike my daughter, I have responsibilities at home that can't see me here until the current situation is resolved. But an astute observation, nonetheless. You dance well. The "for a mortal" rider was clearly implied. You may be the only person in the room tall enough to match me. Just one more service I offer, I joked. Offer me not your service, even in jest, lest I take you up on it, she suggested, tone flat. It was hard to tell whether she was being playful or delivering a dire warning. I swallowed and explained, I'm sure my godmother has warned you that I'm not really the joining type. Freelance is more my speed, no long-term commitments. And yet you have willingly thrown in your lot with those that seem prepared to thwart me. It took me a second before I realized, and I asked, do you mean the British magical government? Quite, she raised an eyebrow. They have no claim on you. Why should you serve their interests and not mine? Well, to be totally honest, I told her, unsure whether I was being compelled to be so truthful, your daughter made a really bad first impression. She didn't seem upset by that admission, so I continued, and none of you will tell me what you're trying to accomplish. But I'm pretty sure tearing down the veil and removing our options to travel aren't in my interests. Did you not receive instruction from your godmother on the ways? She asked, and it took me a minute to realize that she meant the wraths that I'd been afraid to use because doing so tended to pop scary monsters out into the world. The effects on you personally should be minimal. And does the wizard government not need a trial such as that to shake up its complacency? I gave it real consideration and finally answered, I think if you could make a really compelling argument, you'd be making it to the government, rather than just trying to convince me to help you make their decision for them. I don't love the British magical government, but I don't want a lot of people to suffer in the hopes it makes them better. Well reasoned, she told me, for the information you have available to you. If you survive the next few years, I expect you'll become quite formidable. Would that it had been an option to have your service from birth? I don't suppose you're interested in promising me your firstborn, she asked, glancing over at Mathilda. I shook my head, both slightly amused and vaguely offended by the suggestion. That is way more forward relationship planning than I'm prepared to make, even if I were inclined. She gave a faint twitch of a smile and said, at this point, little would surprise me more than you acquiescing to such an offer. Perhaps you should consider that your contrariness makes you predictable. Is this that reverse psychology I've heard so much about? I quipped. Perhaps, or perhaps it is simply me weaving webs that may someday catch a fly. I deadpanned. Guess you wouldn't go with a sowing seeds metaphor, huh? That is much more my counterpart stock in trade, yes. The music is ending, Harry Dresden. Thank you for the dance and the conversation. Hopefully you find the information you learned an even trade. If no debt is owed, then none is claimed, I agreed. By the way, since I've now had a dance with both Maeve and you, should I expect one with your mother soon? That actually got a full, sly, terrifying grin. Not soon, but meeting her someday is not out of the question. You may regret such a dance. With one last nod, she stepped free and returned to her escort. How'd that go? Mathilda asked, reclaiming me for the next dance. Well, it was confusing, I explained. But I didn't promise her our firstborn, so I think it went okay. My girlfriend's face flashed through so many expressions in a moment trying to work that one out that it almost made the whole terrifying dance with the queen of the unseelie she worthwhile. Stargate. I am not a scholar of Egypt's Z-way Bill is, but I don't think that was very accurate, Fleur opined from over her plate of French fries. I'd eventually bowed to ordering them as chips to not be scoffed at by the locals, but they would always be French fries in my heart. It is what the Muggles term science fiction. Percy explained to the French witch. It seems to be largely concerned with various invented stories about beings from other planets, with technology far greater than that of modern Muggles. Doesn't technically require aliens, I corrected. A lot of it is just set in the future with advanced technology. Though a lot of that is less about genuinely trying to figure out what the future will be like, and more talking about modern politics and social issues in a way that people get separated from their existing prejudices. Pretty sure Stargate was about the Gulf War, more or less. I realized everyone, but Penny was completely lost by that reference, so I explained. The Americans are fighting with Iraq, modern Persia, over oil, so desert-based conflicts are in the popular consciousness. The Iraqis aren't space guards, Penny clarified, just in case. We wound up taking a triple date out to see the newly released blockbuster on the January Hogsmeade weekend. The various purebloods didn't stand out too badly in Leicester Square, with the strange dress styles of all the tourists. It was originally just going to be me and Mathilda, but Percy and Penny were interested. Percy suggested that Bill would find the subject matter amusing, and so we wound up taking Fleur as well. Afterwards, we'd adjourned to a nearby restaurant for afternoon snacks and discussion of the movie. They did a pretty good job with the language, Bill opined. Vowel sounds were all wrong, but I could tell they made the effort. The scenery was decent, a lot better than stage plays I've seen. It probably wasn't fair to Muggle Egyptologists that wizards had much more complete records of the language that they weren't sharing. Egyptian wizards were still casting spells in the old language when the Rosetta Stone was big news for non-magical historians. And it was exciting, Mathilda reminded everyone. The costumes were good too, Penny added. Honey, we're going as Shari and Daniel Jackson for Halloween this year. Ha, I wasn't going to say anything, Bill chortled. But he was so much like you, Percy pushed his glasses up and gave a faint smile. I was not expecting the nerd to get the girl. That was a pleasant surprise. I grinned. I think this table can all appreciate how many pretty girls go for nerdy guys. You aren't a nerd, Harry, Mathilda disagreed. You're a geek. Basically interchangeable terms these days, Penny said, and Harry teaches a math class. He's also a nerd. I only taught that one time so far, I argued. And that was just so I could be at the school for my birthday, as well as that worked out. Excuse me, a voice of a young woman cut into our discussion. A 20-something brunette who wasn't a waitress had just walked over to our table holding a pad of paper and a pen. Once she had Fleur's attention, she asked, "Can I get your autograph? You're here promoting a film, right?" "I'm not in any films," the Vila witch demurred. "Sure you are, you're. The woman was clearly reaching for who she thought Fleur was and couldn't come up with an answer. She frowned and stalked off after saying, "Sorry to bother you." It was as if she thought Fleur was famous and just refused to sign an autograph. "Sorry," Fleur said. "Ze allure it does that to muggles. They think always I am some film star, singer, or model. Makes them believe they have seen me somewhere before." She smiled at us. "It makes it hard to go out in public. But I am happy you can all resist. This is the first outing I have had with friends in a long time." "That's rough," I told her, "and it must be even worse if you were full Vila. I can tell you a secret," she asked, lowering her voice. "There is not really such thing as part Vila. There are merely daughters who embrace the magic more than others." Mathilda slapped her forehead. "That makes so much sense. It's not like there are male Vila. You must have to mate with human men. I mean, if you want kids." She nodded. "Those Vila, who have fully chosen Zaya powers, can only have daughters. Those that Ave not can Ave sons, but those boys will just be human." "Where did Vila come from anyway?" Mathilda asked, curious to follow up on a magical species she didn't know much about. "We don't really cover them at Hogwarts." Fleur shrugged. "My great-grandmothers didn't keep good records. We have been heir for centuries at least. Some zinc even longer. Maybe Greece with Z Fury and Harpy connection." Something was tickling the back of my mind about impossibly beautiful women having to choose their magical or mortal half and being around since before the veil. "Sounds kind of like you're a kind of she," I said. "We," she looked confused. "And you are a E." We all stared at each other for a moment before I realized she'd heard she and said he. "No, she. S-I-D-H-E, it's Gaelic," I clarified. "It would help if you pronounced it right," Mathilda poked me. "She." "Oh, she," Fleur said, seeming to get it. "You both said what I said," I argued. Mathilda boggled. "You honestly can't hear the difference," Percy said. "Maybe Harry needs to set learning to speak Gaelic as an aspiration." We all looked at him. He was making a face like he'd told a joke. He didn't try that often and never around his family, but I'd learned to recognize him mugging for a laugh. Finally, he sighed and explained, "Because the D in she, modified by the H, is properly termed aspirated." We all gave him an O rather than a laugh, but Penny took pity and said, "It was very clever, baby." She then realized, "So is that why any Gaelic word with an H in it is confusing? It's especially weird because you'd expect there to be an H at the beginning of the word, after the S, but there isn't one. Lots of Gaelic words that start with S. I seem to have a SH sound. Like Siobhan. Is that the same thing? Percy said. Possibly. As I understand it, it all comes down to old Gaelic writing, including diacritic marks above letters to indicate they were pronounced differently. But those eventually got dropped, probably because of a shift to the limited typesets of the printing press, and they had to start using other letters instead to serve that purpose, which made the whole thing dreadfully unclear to non-native speakers. We were off on a discussion about Gaelic, which Mathilda was very interested in. She could speak the Welsh variant, but hadn't really done a detailed study of the linguistic basis for any of it. Bill had been mostly quiet for the whole thing, and at the next moment of quiet, where it looked like it was time for a topic change, and I was thinking about bringing up the she connection again, he said, "You know, I think someone who worked on Stargate might have not been properly obliviated." That abrupt statement got everyone's attention, and there was a collective, "What?" I realized I'd seen something similar under the pyramids, he explained. In the sections that muggles aren't allowed in, and they're supposed to be obliviated if they sneak in and see something. The gates aren't nearly that big, and they don't spin or anything, but they look kind of similar. We're pretty sure they were old travel anchors for the ancient Egyptian mages, before portkeys and apparition, kind of like a proto-flu. Like the Wraths, I nodded. Then I realized I hadn't really told anyone about those, and explained the old ferry mounds, like the one near Hogsmeade where Penny and Percy first met my godmother. They nodded, remembering the small, man-made hill. They were supposedly easier ways to cross over into the Never Never before the Veil, and connected to other Wraths around the island to make it faster to travel. I bet the Egyptians used those stargates for the same thing. There were nods that it made sense before I cautioned, "I've been trying not to use them because you can stretch the veil and let monsters sneak out if you do." That was why the beast attacks. Mathilda got it. Bellatrix was using those wraths. "Sorry," I apologized to her. "I wasn't sure if we'd been over that. It's getting easier to talk about things now that most of what my godmother is up to is public knowledge." Penny mused. "I guess we should start thinking about needing those again if the Winter Court succeeds in tearing down the veil." Most of the order had been read in on the likely outcome of me or Maeve winning the tournament. "Quitter talk. We just need Fleur to win," Mathilda argued. "You want me to win?" The French girl raised an eyebrow. "That is not exactly spirited competition." "I didn't even want to be in this thing," I told her. "So speaking of helping you win, how's your swimming practice going? And Bill, are you prepared to be a hostage?" I had been taking for granted that the dates from the Yule Ball would be the thing we'd sorely miss, and preparing Mathilda accordingly. I suddenly realized, wait, I understood why you were home for the ball since it was the holidays, but shouldn't you be back in Egypt by now? "I transferred back to the London branch," he shrugged. "Last dig was at a stopping point, and I wanted to be around in case the war heats back up and I'm needed. So what is this about being a hostage?" We spent the rest of the meal strategizing for the second task. It was only a little more than a month away, and I realized I still had a lot of work to do. Fleur's Vila heritage was as a creature of air and fire, so swimming in a freezing Scottish lake wouldn't play to any of her strengths, but it would play to Maeve's. I was going to have to think of some way to prevent her from a runaway victory, or worse, taking the opportunity to just murder one or both of us in the icy depths. I dreamed that night of the halcyon days, when my only real problem was a murderous Lick and his gang of dark wizards.